The night shift in Chinle has a particular kind of quiet that gets under your skin. It's not peaceful. It's the kind of silence that makes you aware of every sound your patrol truck makes, every creak of the suspension as you roll over washboard dirt roads, every ping of cooling metal when you finally pull over to check a gate or shine your spotlight across an empty mesa. I'm Darren Manigoats, and I've been working these roads for the Navajo Tribal Police for 6 years now. Long enough to know that the quietest nights are usually the ones that go wrong. It was mid-October, and the temperature had finally dropped enough that you could roll down the windows without baking inside your vehicle. My partner that week was Elijah Begay, a solid guy who'd transferred in from Window Rock about 8 months back. He had that calm demeanor you want in a partner. Didn't talk just to fill silence. Didn't get jumpy at shadows. Knew when to trust his gut and when to think things through. We'd been paired up often enough that we'd developed a rhythm, the kind where you don't need to explain much. We were heading north on Route 191, about 15 miles out from town, when the radio crackled to life. Marla Nez, working dispatch that night, came through with that particular tone in her voice that meant something was off. Not panicked, but focused in a way that made you pay attention. Unit 7, we've got a possible welfare check. Caller disconnected after providing a rough location. Canyon Road, near mile marker 42. Caller sounded disoriented, mentioned something about eyes and someone still being there. We've tried calling back twice, goes straight to voicemail. I picked up the radio. Unit 7 copies. Canyon Road near marker 42. We're about 20 minutes out. Any description of the caller? Male voice, young adult maybe. Call came from a cell. Numbers registered to a Farmington address, but that's all we've got so far. Darren, the recording's strange. I'll send it to your unit if you want to hear it before you arrive. Elijah glanced over at me. We both knew that when Marla called something strange, it usually was. She'd been working dispatch for 12 years and had heard just about everything you could imagine coming through those lines. Go ahead and send it, I said. We drove in silence for a few minutes while the file transferred to our unit computer. The road ahead was empty, just the cone of our headlights cutting through darkness so complete it felt like driving through ink. Out here, away from any town lights, the stars were so bright they cast actual shadows. But tonight, there was a haze in the air. Dust, or moisture, or something that made everything feel closed in despite the wide-open country around us. When the file finished downloading, I hit play. Static filled the cab first, then a voice came through. Young, like Marla said, but there was something off about the rhythm of his speech. The words came in strange clusters, like he was reading them off something instead of speaking naturally. I'm on Canyon Road, near the big wash. His eyes. They're still here. They're watching from the rocks. I can't look at them anymore. They don't blink. They haven't blinked since the sun went down. More static. Then quieter, almost a whisper. He told me not to stop. He told me to keep driving. But the truck won't start anymore. The keys won't turn. And his eyes are getting closer. The call cut off abruptly. No goodbye. No request for help. Just silence. And then the automated message saying the caller had disconnected. I looked over at Elijah. He was staring straight ahead at the road, but his jaw was set in that way it got when he was working through something. Play it again, he said. I did. We listened 3 more times before either of us spoke. Could be drugs, Elijah finally said. Meth does things to people's perception, makes them paranoid, see things that aren't there. Could be, I agreed. But something about the way the caller had said those words didn't sound like any tweaker I'd dealt with. There was fear in his voice, sure, but it was specific, focused, like he was describing something real that he was seeing right in front of him. We turned off onto Canyon Road about 10 minutes later. The pavement ended after half a mile, giving way to packed dirt that our tires crunched over. The sound seemed too loud in the stillness. Elia switched on our spotlight and started sweeping it across the landscape as we drove. The beam caught red rock formations, scattered juniper trees, the occasional glint of eyes from some animal watching us pass. But no vehicles, no people. Mile marker 42 came up on our right. We slowed down, scanning both sides of the road. The wash the caller had mentioned was about 100 yards to the east, a deep cut in the earth that ran for miles in both directions. During monsoon season, it could fill with water in minutes, turn into a raging torrent that swept away everything in its path, but this time of year it was bone dry, just sand and rocks and the skeletal remains of trees that had washed down from somewhere higher up. "There," Elia said, pointing. I saw it too. Tire tracks leading off the road toward the wash. Fresh ones, the edges still sharp. We followed them with the spotlight until the beam caught metal reflecting back at us. A truck sitting at an angle about 50 yards from the road. The driver's door was hanging open. I called it in to Marla. "Unit 7, we've got a vehicle at the location. Appears abandoned. We're going to check it out." "Copy that, Unit 7. Be advised, still no answer on callback to the original number." We pulled our unit parallel to the road and got out. The air hit me first. Cold and dry, with that particular smell the desert has at night, like dust and stone and something ancient underneath it all. No wind, which was unusual for this area. The silence felt wrong, too complete. Usually you'd hear coyotes in the distance or the rustle of small animals moving through brush. But tonight there was nothing. We approached the truck with our flashlights out and our hands near our weapons. Standard procedure, even though the vehicle looked empty. The make was a Chevy, maybe 15 years old. White paint faded to gray in places. New Mexico plates. As we got closer, I could see the interior through the open door. The dome light was on, casting a weak yellow glow. Elia circled around to the passenger side while I came up on the driver's door. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the on position. The battery was probably dead by now, but the dome light must have had just enough juice left to stay lit. The seat was pushed all the way back like someone tall had been driving. There was a phone charging cable plugged into the dash, but no phone attached to it. "Darren," Elia called from the other side. His voice had that edge to it that made me move quickly. I came around the back of the truck. He was standing a few feet from the passenger door, his flashlight aimed at the ground. When I got close enough to see what he was looking at, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Footprints. Bare footprints, leading away from the truck toward the wash. But that wasn't what made Elia's voice go tight. It was the way the prints looked. The impressions were deep, deeper than they should have been for someone just walking across sandy ground. And they were wet. Not damp, but actually wet, like whoever made them had just stepped out of water. I could see the moisture darkening the sand around each print. I knelt down next to the closest one. It was recent. The edges were still crisp, the moisture still visible. I touched the sand next to the print. Dry. I touched the print itself. My finger came away wet. "There's no water out here," I said, more to myself than to Elia. "The wash is dry. Has been for weeks." "I know," he said quietly. We followed the prints with our flashlights. They led in a straight line toward the wash, never deviating, never showing any sign of hesitation. Just one foot in front of the other, heading into the darkness beyond our light's reach. After about 20 feet, the prints started to change. They got shallower, like whoever was making them was getting lighter, or like they were being lifted up, inch by inch, until their feet barely touched the ground. And then, about 30 feet from the truck, the prints stopped. Just ended in the middle of nothing, like the person making them had simply ceased to exist. Elia and I stood there for a long moment, our flashlights trained on that last partial print. Neither of us wanted to say what we were both thinking. "We need to check the wash," I finally said. "Could be he fell in, got disoriented in the dark." Elia nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe it any more than I did. People don't leave wet footprints in dry sand. People don't get lighter with each step until they float away. But we were cops, and cops dealt in what could be explained, what could be written in a report that made sense to someone reading it later. We made our way toward the wash, following the line where the footprints had been heading. The ground sloped down gradually at first, then dropped off sharply at the edge. I shone my light down into the wash. It was about 15 feet deep at this point. The bottom a mix of sand and smooth river rocks. Nothing moved down there. No sign of anyone who might have fallen. "Unit 7, this is dispatch. Everything okay out there?" I'd almost forgotten we had the radio. I pulled it from my belt. "Unit 7, we're still on scene. No sign of the caller yet. Vehicle is abandoned. We're conducting a search of the immediate area." "Copy. Keep me updated." We spent the next 20 minutes searching in widening circles from the truck. We found nothing. No more prints, wet or dry. No clothing, no phone, no signs of a struggle. Just that truck with its door hanging open and its keys in the ignition, and those impossible footprints that led nowhere. It was Elia who noticed the rocks. We'd circled back toward the wash, were standing near the edge looking down, when he suddenly grabbed my arm. "Look, up on the rim, across the wash." I followed his gaze. The opposite edge of the wash was maybe 40 yards away, too far to jump, too steep to climb out of easily if you fell in. But there, right at the rim, I could make out shapes in the darkness. At first, I thought they were just more rock formations, the kind that dotted the landscape everywhere out here. But then my flashlight beam hit them, and I saw what Elia had seen. They were arranged, deliberately arranged. 5 rocks, each about the size of a basketball, set in a perfect line along the rim. And they were smooth, polished in a way that rocks out here never were. They looked almost like river stones, but there was no river anywhere near this area, not for miles. "That's not natural," Elia said. "No," I agreed. "It's not." We stood there, staring across the wash at those 5 stones, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Because in the silence, in that complete and total absence of sound, I could have sworn I heard breathing. Not from Elia or from me, but from somewhere else, somewhere close. I swept my flashlight in a circle around us. Nothing. Just empty desert, empty sky, empty darkness, pressing in from all sides. "We should call for backup," Elia said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension underneath it. "And tell them what? That we found wet footprints and some rocks?" He didn't answer, because we both knew how that would sound. We both knew what the other officers would say, the jokes that would get made back at the station. And neither of us wanted to be the guys who got spooked by shadows and stones. "Let's check the truck one more time," I said. "See if there's anything we missed, some ID, some indication of who we're looking for." We walked back to the vehicle. The dome light was dimmer now, the battery finally starting to give out. I leaned into the cab and popped the glove compartment. Registration, insurance card, an old map of Arizona. The name on the registration was Marcus Benally, 24 years old. Address in Farmington. I made a note of it to run through our system when we got back. There was something else in the glove box, pushed toward the back. A piece of paper, folded multiple times. I pulled it out and unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map, crude but detailed. Canyon Road was marked, and the wash, and what looked like specific rock formations labeled with small X's. At the bottom, in tight, cramped handwriting, was a note. Don't stop at the 5 stones, don't look at them directly. If you see eyes in the rocks, it's already too late. I showed it to Elia. His face went pale in the flashlight beam. This was planned, he said quietly. He knew something was out here. And he came anyway. Or he was crazy, I said. But my voice didn't sound convincing, even to myself. That's when we heard it. A sound drifting across the wash from the direction of those 5 stones. It was faint, barely audible, but in that oppressive silence it carried clearly. It sounded like someone whispering. Not words exactly, but the cadence of words, the rhythm of speech without any actual meaning behind it. Elia's hand went to his weapon. You hear that? Yeah, I said. I hear it. The whispering continued for maybe 30 seconds. Then it stopped as abruptly as it had started. The silence that followed felt even heavier than before, like the air itself had gotten thicker. My radio crackled. Unit 7, what's your status? Marla's voice sounded distorted, like it was coming from very far away instead of just 15 miles. I pressed the transmit button. Unit 7, we're still on scene. We found ID for the vehicle owner. Marcus Benally, 24, Farmington address, no sign of him yet. Static, then, copy, running, now, advise. The signal cut out. I tried again. Dispatch, you're breaking up. Say again? Nothing but static. I looked at the radio display. Full bars. No reason for the signal to be cutting out like that. Let's head back to the unit, I said. We can call this in on the other radio, get some backup out here to help with the search. We started walking back toward our truck, our flashlights sweeping the ground ahead of us. We were maybe halfway there when Elia stopped dead. Darren, the truck. I looked. Our unit was right where we'd left it, but something was different. The driver's door was open. Both of us knew for certain we'd closed both doors when we got out. I always closed my door. Always. It was habit, ingrained after years of service. We approached slowly. As we got closer, I could see that the radio inside was on, the display glowing green in the darkness. But the engine was off. The radio shouldn't have had power. I reached the door first and looked inside. Everything appeared normal. Nothing had been disturbed. But sitting on the driver's seat, right where I would have sat, was a smooth stone. Round, about the size of a baseball, polished to an almost mirror finish. Neither of us touched it. We just stood there, staring at it, trying to make sense of how it had gotten there. Trying to make sense of any of this. The radio inside crackled to life. Not Marla's voice this time, but something else. Something that might have been words, but in a language I didn't recognize. The sounds were harsh, guttural, rising and falling in a pattern that made my teeth ache. And then, from somewhere out in the darkness beyond our lights, we heard footsteps. Not running, just walking. Steady, measured, getting closer. But when I spun around with my flashlight, there was nothing there. The footsteps continued, circling us, always just beyond the reach of our lights. Elia grabbed my arm. We need to leave, right now. I didn't argue. We both got in the truck, Elia using his flashlight to knock the stone off the seat without touching it with his hands. I started the engine. Mercifully, it caught on the first try, and threw it into reverse. The tires spun in the dirt for a second before finding purchase, and then we were backing up, turning, heading for the paved road. I didn't stop looking in the rearview mirror until we were back on Route 191. And what I saw in those last few seconds before we lost sight of the scene would stay with me for a long time. The 5 stones across the wash. They were glowing. Just faintly. A soft, phosphorescent green that pulsed in rhythm with that whispering sound we'd heard earlier. And standing between them and the abandoned truck, barely visible in our taillights, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, with arms that hung down past where its knees should have been. I blinked, and it was gone. Just darkness and distance, and the receding glow of those stones. We drove in silence for 10 minutes before either of us spoke. "Did you see?" Elia started. "Yeah," I said. "I saw it. We never did find Marcus Benally. Search and rescue teams went out the next day and found his truck right where we'd left it. The door was closed, the keys were gone, and there were no footprints anywhere around the vehicle, wet or dry. The 5 stones were still there across the wash, but in daylight they looked like any other rocks. Nobody could explain why they were arranged that way, or how they'd gotten so smooth. The hand-drawn map was gone from the glove compartment. When I filed my report, I mentioned it, described what it said. But without the physical evidence, there was nothing to support my account. Elia backed me up, said he'd seen it too. But I could tell from the way the sergeant looked at us that he thought we'd either imagined it or were covering up some kind of mistake. Marcus's family in Farmington said he'd been acting strange in the weeks before he disappeared. Obsessed with stories about the canyon lands, about things that lived in the washes, about eyes that watched from the rocks. They'd thought he was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe he was. Or maybe he'd found something out here that the rest of us were better off not knowing about. I still drive Canyon Road sometimes. It's part of my patrol route, part of the job. But I don't stop near mile marker 42 anymore. And I don't look too closely at the rock formations along the wash. Because sometimes, on the quietest nights when the air is still and the stars are bright and that particular kind of desert silence settles over everything, I can still hear it, that whispering sound, carrying across the empty spaces. Those words that aren't quite words, speaking a language that no human mouth should be able to form. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see wet footprints on the side of the road, leading into the darkness, leading nowhere at all. It was almost 3 weeks before we got another call to Canyon Road. The intervening time had been quiet, routine patrols and traffic stops, nothing that kept me up at night. I'd almost convinced myself that what Elia and I experienced had been some kind of shared stress reaction, our minds playing tricks in the dark. Almost. Elia had been different since that night. Not dramatically. He still showed up for shifts, still did his job with the same competence as always. But there was a distance to him now. Like part of his attention was always somewhere else. He didn't talk about what we'd seen. Neither did I. There were things that sounded too crazy to say out loud, even to your partner. The call came in on a Thursday night around 10. I was working solo that shift. Elia had requested some personal time, said he needed to visit family in Tuba City. Marla's voice came over the radio with that same careful tone she'd used 3 weeks earlier. Unit 7, we've got a reported disturbance on Canyon Road, approximately half a mile past mile marker 42. Caller says there's someone standing in the middle of the road, not responding to vehicles. I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. Unit 7 copies. Any description of the individual? Caller said they couldn't make out details. Just someone standing there. They tried to go around, but the person moved to block them. They're pulled over about a quarter mile back waiting for police response. Copy that, en route. I took Route 191 north, driving faster than I probably should have. The night was clearer than it had been 3 weeks ago, the stars brilliant overhead, no haze or dust in the air. But that didn't make me feel any better. If anything, the clarity made it worse. Out here, you could see for miles in daylight. At night, all that visibility just meant more darkness to look into. I turned onto Canyon Road and immediately spotted the caller's vehicle. A newer model SUV, hazards flashing, pulled well off to the shoulder. A woman got out as I approached, waving her arms. I pulled up alongside her and rolled down my window. "Thank God," she said. Her name was Sarah Watchman, she told me, from many farms. She'd been driving home from Chinle when she saw the person in the road. "He's still there. Or he was 5 minutes ago. I didn't want to get any closer." "Can you describe what you saw?" She hugged herself, even though the night wasn't particularly cold. "It was a man, I think. Tall, just standing in the middle of the road with his back to me. I honked, but he didn't move. So I went to go around, and he shifted. Not quickly, just slid to the side, blocking me again. That's when I backed up and called you." "Did you see his face?" "No, he never turned around. I left my high beams on him the whole time, but I couldn't make out details. It was like he was blurry somehow, like he wasn't quite solid." I took down her information and told her to wait there while I checked it out. She nodded gratefully and got back in her SUV, locking the doors. I drove forward slowly, my spotlight sweeping the road ahead. Sarah's high beams were still pointed up the road, creating a tunnel of light through the darkness. And there, maybe 100 yards ahead, I could see a figure standing in the middle of the pavement. I stopped about 50 feet back and killed my engine. The silence rushed in immediately. That same oppressive quiet I remembered from 3 weeks ago. I turned on my body camera, procedure for any contact with civilians, and got out of the truck. "This is Navajo Tribal Police," I called out. "I need you to move to the side of the road." The figure didn't move, didn't turn around, just stood there, utterly still. I approached carefully, my hand near my weapon, my flashlight trained on the figure. As I got closer, details started to resolve. It was a man, like Sarah had said. Tall, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", wearing dark clothes, jeans, and a jacket that looked too heavy for the weather. His head was down, chin almost touching his chest. "Sir, I need you to turn around and show me your hands." Nothing, no response at all. I was about 20 feet away now. Close enough to see that his feet were bare. Close enough to see that the pavement around him was wet, like water had been spilled there. Close enough to see that his skin had a strange waxy texture that didn't look quite right. "Sir, this is your last warning. Turn around and show me your hands, or I will approach and physically turn you around." The figure's head tilted slightly, like it was listening. Then, slowly, it began to turn. I've seen a lot of things in 6 years of police work. I've seen car wrecks that turned my stomach, domestic violence scenes that made me want to put my fist through a wall, overdoses where people had died in positions that didn't look human. But I had never seen anything like what I saw when that figure completed its turn and I got a clear look at its face. It was Marcus Benally. I knew it immediately, even though I'd only seen his picture on the registration. Same facial structure, same build, but his eyes were wrong. They were open, unblinking, and filled with something that looked like water. Not tears. Actual water, clear and clean, that sloshed slightly when he moved his head. And his mouth was open just a crack, and I could see more water there, could see it running down his chin in a thin stream. "Marcus," I said, not even sure why I was using his first name. His mouth opened wider. Water poured out, more than should have been possible to hold in a human mouth. It splashed on the pavement at his feet, spreading in a dark pool. And then he spoke. The voice wasn't his. It was too deep, too hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Don't look at them," the voice said. "Don't look at the stones. Marcus, I need you to sit down on the ground. I'm going to call for medical assistance." "They're watching," the voice continued like I hadn't spoken. "They're always watching. From the rocks, from the wash, from the spaces between spaces. He took a step toward me, then another. Water continued to pour from his mouth with each movement, leaving wet footprints on the pavement. The same wet footprints I'd seen 3 weeks ago leading away from his truck. I backed up, my hand now definitely on my weapon. "Marcus, stop. Don't come any closer." "He told me not to stop," the voice said. Marcus's head tilted at an unnatural angle, too far to one side. He told me to keep driving, but I wanted to see. I wanted to know what was watching from the rocks, what had eyes that never blinked. "Who told you not to stop?" "My grandfather, before he went into the wash, before they took him." Marcus's body jerked, like something inside him was fighting to get out. "They showed me things under the water that isn't there, things that have been waiting in the dry places for someone to see them." More water poured from his mouth, from his eyes, from his ears. It ran down his neck, soaked through his clothes, puddled at his feet. And impossibly, the pool was getting deeper, like there was an infinite amount of water inside him trying to force its way out. "I need you to get down on the ground," I said, drawing my weapon now. Not because I thought I would shoot, what could shooting possibly do, but because I needed something familiar to hold on to, something that made sense in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond sense. Marcus's head rolled back, his water-filled eyes staring straight up at the stars. "They want you to see too. They want everyone to see. The stones are waiting. The eyes are waiting. The water that isn't water is waiting." He took another step. The pool around his feet was spreading, reaching toward me across the pavement. I could see now that it wasn't moving like normal water. It was crawling, almost, tendrils of liquid extending outward with purpose, with intention. I backed up faster. "Marcus, stop right now, or I will be forced to—" He collapsed, just crumpled like someone had cut his strings, falling face first onto the wet pavement, with a sound that was part splash, part crack of bone. The water around him spread out in a rush, then slowly began to sink into the ground, leaving behind only damp pavement and the prone form of Marcus Benally. I rushed forward and rolled him over, checking for a pulse. Nothing. His skin was cold, impossibly cold, and wet to the touch. His eyes were still open, but the water was gone from them now. They were just empty, staring at nothing. I called it in immediately. "Unit 7, I need medical and backup at my location. Canyon Road, half a mile past marker 42. I have an unresponsive male, possible cardiac arrest." Marla's response was garbled like before. "Unit, copy, medical en route, Darren, careful." The last word came through clearly, and something about the way she said it made me look up from Marcus's body and scan the area around me. The 5 stones across the wash were glowing again. That same faint green phosphorescence, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. And standing on the rim, silhouetted against the glow, were figures. 5 of them, one behind each stone. Tall and thin like the figure I'd seen 3 weeks ago, with those 2 long arms hanging at their sides. I grabbed Marcus under the arms and started dragging him back toward my unit. He was heavy, dead weight, and the wet pavement made it hard to get traction. But I didn't dare stop. Those figures weren't moving, but I could feel them watching. Could feel their attention like a physical pressure against my skin. Sarah Watchman had gotten out of her SUV and was standing by my unit. "Oh my God," she said, when she saw Marcus. "Is he—" "Help me get him in the back," I said, my voice coming out harder than I intended. Together, we managed to lift him into the rear seat of my truck. His skin was getting colder by the second, and water was still seeping from his mouth and nose, not pouring like before, just a slow, steady leak that pooled on the seat beneath him. "Follow me back to town," I told Sarah. "Don't stop. Don't look at the rocks across the wash. Just drive." Her eyes went wide. "What rocks? What's happening?" "Just promise me. Don't look and don't stop." She nodded and ran back to her SUV. I got behind the wheel of my unit and started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I could see the figures were still there, still standing motionless behind those glowing stones. But as I put the truck in gear and started to drive away, one of them raised an arm, pointed, not at me, but at something ahead of me on the road. I looked forward and felt my blood go cold. There were more of them, standing in a line across the road, blocking the path back to town. 7 of them, maybe 8. It was hard to tell where one ended and the next began. They swayed slightly, like reeds in a breeze, even though the air was perfectly still. I slammed on the brakes. Sarah's SUV screeched to a halt behind me. My radio erupted with static. Then that same harsh, guttural language I'd heard 3 weeks ago. The sound made my head pound, made my vision blur at the edges. The figures on the road began to walk toward us. Not quickly, but with terrible purpose. Their movements were wrong, joints bending in ways that human joints shouldn't bend. And as they got closer, I could see their eyes. Empty sockets that nonetheless seemed to contain entire oceans, deep and dark, and full of things that had never seen sunlight. I made a decision that probably saved my life and Sarah's. Instead of trying to go through them or turn around, I jerked the wheel hard to the right and drove off the road entirely, bouncing over the rough terrain parallel to the pavement. Sarah followed, her SUV's suspension protesting as it hit the uneven ground. The figures didn't follow. They just stood there in the road, watching us go. And behind them, behind the stones, I could see the wash itself beginning to glow. That same green light, rising from the depths like something was awakening down there, like something was beginning to notice us. We drove across the desert for a quarter-mile before I felt safe enough to angle back toward the pavement. My truck's suspension was shot to hell, and I could hear something rattling under the hood that hadn't been rattling before. But we were moving, we were getting away, and that was all that mattered. When we finally reached Route 191, I pulled over and got out to check on Marcus. He was still in the back seat, still cold, still leaking water. But his eyes had closed at some point during the drive. And carved into the skin of his forehead, shallow but distinct, were 5 marks. 5 small circles arranged in a perfect line, just like the stones. Sarah pulled up next to me. She was crying, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. "What were those things?" she asked. "What the hell were those things?" "I don't know," I said. It was the only honest answer I could give. Medical arrived 20 minutes later, followed by 3 other units. They took Marcus's body, because that's what it was now, there was no doubt about that, and started asking questions. I told them what I could, left out what I couldn't explain. Sarah corroborated my account, at least the parts that made sense. A man in the road, unresponsive, then collapsed. Nobody asked about the wet footprints on my back seat. Nobody asked about the marks on Marcus's forehead. And nobody suggested we go back to Canyon Road to check the scene more thoroughly. The medical examiner ruled it a drowning. Somehow, some way, Marcus Benally had drowned on dry land, 15 miles from the nearest body of water. His lungs were full of fluid, his tissues saturated with moisture. The official report said it was physiologically impossible, but the evidence was right there on the table in front of them. I requested a transfer the next day, didn't give a specific reason, just said I needed a change of assignment. But the sergeant who took my request looked at me with knowing eyes. He'd been working these lands longer than I had. knew the stories that didn't make it into official reports. "Canyon Road?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He stamped my transfer without another word. I was supposed to leave the next week. My transfer was approved, paperwork processed, new assignment waiting for me in Kayenta. All I had to do was work my remaining shifts and I'd be done with Chinle, done with Canyon Road, done with whatever was living in that wash and watching from those stones. But things have a way of not working out the way you plan. It was my second to last shift. I was counting down the hours, trying not to think about wet footprints and glowing stones and voices that spoke in languages older than words. Marla was on dispatch again. She'd been quieter than usual over the radio the past few weeks, and I wondered if she'd heard the recordings of my encounters. Wondered if she'd listened to that static-filled transmission from 3 weeks ago and heard things in it that shouldn't have been there. Around midnight, she called me. "Unit 7, I need you to swing by the station. We've got something you need to see." "Can it wait until end of shift?" I asked, even though I knew what the answer would be. "No, Darren. It really can't." I drove back to the station with a feeling of dread settling in my stomach. The building was mostly dark, just the duty desk and dispatch lit up. Marla met me at the door. Her face was pale, her eyes red like she'd been crying or had stopped herself from crying. "I need to show you something," she said. "But first, you need to understand. I didn't want to involve you. You're leaving. You should just go and forget about all of this. But he asked for you specifically." "Who did?" She led me to one of the interview rooms. Through the small window in the door, I could see a man sitting at the table. Old, maybe 70, with long gray hair tied back. He was wearing traditional clothing, and his hands were folded calmly on the table in front of him. "His name is Atsidi Benali," Marla said quietly. "Marcus's grandfather. He walked into the station an hour ago and said he needed to speak with you. Said it was about his grandson. Said it was about the stones." I felt my mouth go dry. How does he know I was involved? "I don't know. He just knew. Said you were the one who found Marcus the second time, the one who tried to help him." I stood there for a long moment, hand on the doorknob, trying to decide if I really wanted to go inside. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to walk away, to get in my truck and drive straight to Kayenta without looking back. But Marcus's face was stuck in my mind, those water-filled eyes, that voice that wasn't his own. If there was any chance this man could explain what had happened, I needed to hear it. I opened the door and went inside. Atsidi looked up as I entered. His eyes were sharp, clear, the eyes of someone much younger. He studied me for a moment, then nodded like I'd passed some kind of test. "You're the one who saw them," he said. Not a question. I sat down across from him. "Yes, my grandson didn't listen." I told him about the stones, about what watches from the wash. I told him the old stories, the ones we're not supposed to speak about anymore. But he thought they were just stories. Thought they were legends we told to scare children. "What are they?" I asked. "Those things by the wash." Atsidi was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, like he was choosing each word with great precision. "They're what was here before us, before the Dene, before any people. They lived in the water when there was water. When the great rivers ran through these lands, and the washes were full year-round. But the water went away, the rivers dried up, and they were trapped." "But the wash is dry," I said. "Has been for years. Yes, dry in this world, but not in theirs. They exist in the spaces between, where the water that was meets the water that will be again. The stones mark the crossing points, the places where their world touches ours." I thought about the 5 smooth stones, arranged in that perfect line. about the green glow that seemed to come from depths that shouldn't exist. Why did they take Marcus? They didn't take him. Not at first. He went to them. He wanted to see, to prove the stories were false. So he stopped at the stones. He looked at them directly, in the way you're not supposed to look, and they looked back. Atsidis' hands tightened on the table. Once they see you, really see you, they don't let go. They pull you between worlds. You're alive in one, dead in the other. You can walk in both places, but you belong to neither. The water, I said. Why was there water coming out of him? Because he's drowning in their world. Has been drowning since the moment he looked at the stones. Will be drowning forever unless someone brings him all the way through to one side or the other. Atsidi leaned forward. That's why I'm here. I need your help to bring him back. I stood up so fast my chair fell over backward. No, absolutely not. I'm done with Canyon Road. I'm done with all of this. He's my grandson. My blood. I can't leave him trapped between worlds. He's dead, I said harshly. I saw him die. The medical examiner confirmed it. His body is dead, but his spirit is still drowning. Still trapped in that space between water that was and water that will be. If we don't free him, he'll become like them, another watcher in the stones. I walked to the door, my hand on the handle. I'm sorry about your grandson, I really am. But I can't help you. I won't go back there. They know you now, Atsidi said quietly. You stopped at the stones. You saw them looking back. You think you can just leave and they'll forget you? I froze, turned around slowly. I didn't stop at the stones. I didn't look at them directly. You were close enough. Close enough that they noticed you. Why do you think they let you go? He shook his head sadly. They're patient. They've been waiting in that wash for thousands of years. They can wait a little longer for you to come back. You're wrong, I said, but my voice didn't sound convinced. Am I? Have you been sleeping well? Having strange dreams about water, about drowning, about voices calling from dark places? I had, every night since the first encounter. Dreams of being underwater, of trying to surface but never quite making it, of something with two long arms reaching up from below to pull me down. I thought it was just stress, just my mind processing trauma, but the way Atsidi was looking at me, I knew it was more than that. What do I have to do? I asked, even though I already regretted the question. Go to the stones at dawn, when the sun first touches them. That's when the barrier between worlds is thinnest. Bring something of Marcus's, something personal, and bring water from the San Juan River. Water that flows, water that's alive. And then what? Pour the water on the stones in the order they were set, west to east following the sun. Speak Marcus's name with each pour. Call him back from the drowning place. If he hears you, if he's still himself enough to respond, his spirit will follow the living water back to this world. And if it doesn't work, Atsidi's face was grim. Then run. Don't look back. Don't stop until you're far from the wash. Because if he's too far gone, if he's already becoming one of them, they'll use him to pull you through instead. I left the station an hour later with a plastic bottle full of river water and one of Marcus's t-shirts that his family had provided. The shirt still smelled like him, like soap and cologne, and the faint musk of sweat. It felt wrong to be carrying it, like I was grave robbing even though Marcus's body was in a morgue drawer 20 miles away. I didn't call Elia, didn't tell anyone where I was going. This was my decision, my mistake to fix. If it went wrong, there was no reason to drag anyone else down with me. I reached Canyon Road just before dawn. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, turning from black to deep blue. I drove past mile marker 42 slowly, my headlights catching the turnoff to the wash. The tire tracks from Marcus's truck were still there, faint but visible, and beyond them I could see the 5 stones glowing softly in the pre-dawn light. I parked on the shoulder and got out. The air was cold, my breath visible in small clouds. Everything was quiet. Not the oppressive silence I'd experienced before, but a natural quiet. The hush that comes before sunrise. Birds would start calling soon. Small animals would emerge to forage. Normal things, normal sounds. I walked toward the wash, carrying the bottle of river water in one hand and Marcus's shirt in the other. The stones were about 40 yards from the road, arranged in that perfect line along the wash's rim. Up close, they looked different than they had in my headlights. Older, somehow, like they'd been there since the earth was formed. I stood in front of the westernmost stone and uncapped the bottle. The water inside was clean and clear, moving slightly with the motion of my hands. Living water, like Atsiti had said. I took a breath, then poured a small amount on top of the stone. "Marcus Benally," I said clearly. "Come back from the drowning place." The water ran down the sides of the stone, darkening the rock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone began to glow brighter, that green phosphorescence intensifying until I had to look away. When I looked back, the water I'd poured was gone, not absorbed, gone, like it had never been there. I moved to the second stone, poured water, spoke his name. The same result, intense light, then nothing. Third stone, fourth. By the time I reached the fifth and final stone, the sun was starting to peek over the horizon. The first rays of light touched the wash, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. The wash wasn't empty anymore. It was full of water. Dark water. Deeper than the wash itself should have allowed, moving in slow, purposeful currents. And in that water, I could see shapes. Human shapes, dozens of them. Standing beneath the surface, looking up at me with empty eyes. I poured the last of the river water on the fifth stone. "Marcus Benally, come back from the drowning place." The stone flared so bright I had to close my eyes. When I opened them again, the water in the wash was churning, frothing like something was fighting to surface. And then I saw him. Marcus. Rising from the depths, his arms reaching upward, his mouth open in a silent scream. But he wasn't alone. The other shapes were reaching for him, grabbing his legs, his arms, trying to pull him back down. And behind them, at the very bottom of that impossible water, I could see the figure I'd seen before. The tall one with 2 long arms. It was watching. Waiting. I dropped to my knees at the edge of the wash and reached down, holding Marcus's shirt over the water. "Marcus, grab it, come on!" His hand broke the surface, grasping, and I shoved the shirt toward him. His fingers closed around the fabric, and I pulled with everything I had. The resistance was incredible, like I was trying to pull him through concrete instead of water. But inch by inch he rose higher. His head broke the surface. His eyes were no longer filled with water. They were his own eyes, terrified and desperate and human. His mouth opened, and he tried to speak, but only water came out. Still drowning, even with his head above the surface. I grabbed his wrist with my other hand and pulled harder. Behind him, the shapes were surging upward, reaching for me now as well as him. If they touched me, I knew instinctively they would pull me under too. I would join them in that drowning place, forever trapped between worlds. "Come on!" I screamed, pulling with strength I didn't know I had. Marcus's torso cleared the water, then his waist, then his legs, and suddenly the resistance vanished and we both fell backward onto solid ground. I scrambled away from the edge, dragging Marcus with me, not stopping until we were 20 feet back from the rim. The water in the wash was already receding, sinking back into depths that shouldn't exist. The shapes were disappearing with it, fading like mist, but the tall figure at the bottom remained, standing motionless, watching us go. And just before the water disappeared completely, it raised one long arm and pointed at me. Not a threat. A promise. Marcus was coughing, water pouring from his mouth and nose and lungs, but it was finite water now, not that endless stream. After a minute, he could breathe. After 2, he could speak. "Thank you," he gasped. "Thank you, God. Thank you." I helped him to his feet. The sun was fully above the horizon now, normal daylight washing away the strangeness of the pre-dawn. The 5 stones were just stones again, not glowing, not special. The wash was dry, just sand and rocks. "Can you walk?" I asked. He nodded, leaning heavily on me. We made our way back to my truck. I didn't look back at the wash, didn't want to see if anything was following us. I got Marcus to the hospital, told them I'd found him wandering near the wash, disoriented and dehydrated. The doctors were amazed he was alive. Couldn't explain how he'd survived 3 weeks without food or water. But they didn't ask too many questions. Out here, sometimes people survived things they shouldn't. Sometimes the desert gave back what it had taken. Atsidi was waiting at the hospital when I arrived. He took one look at his grandson and nodded, satisfied. Then he looked at me, and his expression was sad. "You did well," he said. "But you know what this means." "They saw me," I said. "Yes. You went right to the edge. You reached into their world. They won't forget that. What do I do?" He put a hand on my shoulder. "You stay away from the stones. You don't go near the wash at night. And you never, ever stop when you hear something calling from dark places." He paused, but most importantly, you remember that you can still walk away. You're not trapped like Marcus was. You came close, but you didn't cross over. As long as you respect the boundaries, they'll respect yours. I took his words to heart. I transferred to Kayenta the next week, like planned. Got a small apartment, started working a different patrol route. Tried to put Chinle and Canyon Road behind me. But sometimes, on the quietest nights, I still hear it. That whispering sound, carried on a wind that isn't really blowing. Those words that aren't quite words, speaking in languages older than human memory. And sometimes I dream about water, about drowning, about shapes reaching up from impossible depths. And sometimes when I wake up, my pillow is wet. I'd been in Kayenta for 2 months when Elia called me. I hadn't talked to him since leaving Chinle. We'd exchanged a few texts, the usual, hope the new assignment is going well kind of thing, but nothing substantial. So when I saw his name on my phone at 2 in the morning, I knew it wasn't a social call. "Darren," he said when I answered. His voice was tight, controlled. "I need you to come back to Chinle, tonight." I sat up in bed, instantly awake. What happened? There's been another one. Another disappearance on Canyon Road. But this time it's different. Different how? The caller is still on the line. Has been for 6 hours. Won't hang up, won't stop talking. And Darren, he paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath. "She's asking for you by name." My blood went cold. "Who is it?" "We don't know. The number isn't registered to anyone. But she knows things. Things about Marcus Benally. Things about what you did at the wash. Things that nobody should know." I wanted to say no. Wanted to tell Elia I couldn't help. That I'd moved on. That whatever was happening in Chinle wasn't my problem anymore. But I could hear the fear in his voice. The same fear I'd felt standing at the edge of that wash. And I knew that if I didn't go back, if I didn't at least try to help, it would haunt me for the rest of my life. "I'll be there in 2 hours," I said. I threw on my clothes and drove faster than I should have, pushing my truck to its limits on the empty highways. The night was clear again, stars brilliant overhead, that same pristine visibility that made the darkness feel deeper by contrast. I kept my windows up and my radio on, anything to fill the silence, to keep me from hearing sounds that might not be there. Elia was waiting for me at the station. He looked terrible, exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a tremor in his hands that I'd never seen before. "She's in conference room B," he said without preamble. We put her on speaker. Marla's been in there the whole time trying to keep her talking, but she only says a few things, then goes quiet for long stretches. Waiting. Waiting for what? For you. He led me down the hallway. I could hear a voice as we approached, female, speaking in that same careful, measured tone that made every word sound significant. When Elia opened the door, I saw Marla sitting at the conference table, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past 6 hours. The speakerphone in the center of the table was glowing green, active. The voice coming from it stopped when we entered. "Darren Mannygoats," it said. Not a question, a statement. "You came back." I sat down at the table. Elia and Marla both looked at me, waiting to see what I would do. I leaned toward the speaker. "Who is this? You know who I am. You saw me, at the bottom of the water that isn't water, reaching up from the drowning place." My mouth went dry. "Where are you calling from?" "Canyon Road, mile marker 42, where the stones watch, where the wash waits." The voice was calm, conversational, like we were discussing the weather. "I've been here since sunset, standing where Marcus stood, looking at what Marcus looked at." "You need to leave that area," I said, trying to keep my voice professional. "It's not safe. I know it's not safe. That's why I'm here. Because Marcus told me about the stones, about the things that watch from the wash. He told me before you brought him back, when he was still between worlds, still drowning. Marcus is alive. He's recovering. Whatever he told you, he told me the truth." The voice interrupted. "He told me that you reached into their world and pulled him out, that you poured living water on the stones and called his name and broke their hold on him. He told me you could do the same for me. I don't understand. You're not trapped. You're calling us right now. You can walk away." "No," the voice said softly. "I can't. I stopped at the stones 3 nights ago. I looked at them directly, in the way you're not supposed to look, and they looked back. I've been drowning ever since. In my dreams, in my waking hours, everywhere I go, I can feel the water filling my lungs even though I'm standing on dry land." I exchanged glances with Elia. He looked as lost as I felt. "What's your name?" I asked. Sarah Watchman." The name hit me like a physical blow. Sarah Watchman, the woman who'd called in the disturbance, who'd been there when I found Marcus standing in the road. She'd seen the figures had driven past the stones. I'd told her not to look, but in the chaos of that night, maybe she had. Maybe just a glance had been enough. "Sarah, listen to me. You need to leave the wash. Get in your car and drive back to town. We'll meet you there and figure this out." "It's too late for that. They're here now, all around me. I can see them in the spaces between the stones. They're waiting for the sun to set completely. Once it's full dark, they'll come for me, just like they came for Marcus." I looked at my watch. It was 4:47 a.m. Sunrise was still over an hour away. "We're coming to get you," I said, standing up. "Stay on the line. Keep talking to us. Don't hang up." "No," Sarah said. "Don't come. If you come, they'll take you too. I can feel it. They're angry that you took Marcus back. They want a replacement, They want you. I don't care what they want. We're not leaving you there. Then bring what you brought for Marcus, the living water, the personal item. Do the ritual again. Maybe it will work. Maybe I'll be able to fight my way back like he did. Elia grabbed my arm. Darren, you can't. You heard what Atsidi said. You got lucky once. If you go back, if I don't go back, she dies, I said. Or worse, she becomes like them. I pulled my arm free and headed for the door. Elia followed, and Marla stayed at the conference table, keeping the line open to Sarah. At least let me come with you, Elia said. Don't do this alone. I wanted to say yes. Wanted the backup, the support, someone to watch my back. But I thought about those figures standing in the road, about how they'd blocked our path, about how they'd looked at me with those empty eyes that somehow contained entire oceans. I couldn't risk Elia like that. No, I said, this is my responsibility. I'm the one who got close to them. I'm the one they want. Better that it's just me. I didn't give him time to argue. I got in my truck and drove to the San Juan River, filling my water bottle in the pre-dawn darkness. Then I headed for Canyon Road, driving too fast, racing against the sunrise that would come whether I was ready or not. The sky was just starting to lighten when I reached mile marker 42. Sarah's SUV was parked on the shoulder, hazards flashing. I could see her standing near the wash, silhouetted against the slightly paler eastern horizon. She wasn't moving, just standing there with her arms at her sides, looking down into the dry wash. I parked behind her vehicle and got out. The air was cold enough that my breath misted, but I was sweating anyway. Fear, adrenaline, the knowledge that I was about to do something monumentally stupid for the second time in 2 months. Sarah turned when she heard me approach. Even in the dim light, I could see that she was pale, her lips tinged with blue like someone suffering from hypothermia, and her eyes, there was water in them. Not as much as there had been in Marcus's, but enough. Enough to know that she was telling the truth, that she was drowning in some impossible way. You came, she said. Her voice sounded different than it had on the phone. Thinner, like it was coming from very far away. Yeah, I said. I came. I walked past her to the stones. They were glowing faintly in the pre-dawn light, that green phosphorescence just visible. And beyond them, at the bottom of the wash, I could see water. Dark water, moving slowly, and shapes standing in it, waiting. Do you have something personal? I asked Sarah. Something that connects you to this world? She reached into her jacket and pulled out a photograph. My daughter, she said. She's 8. I need to get back to her. I took the photo and looked at it. A young girl with her mother's eyes, smiling at the camera. The kind of smile that made you want to smile back, that reminded you why any of this mattered. Okay, I said. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pour the water on the stones and call your name, just like I did for Marcus. When the wash fills up and you see yourself down there, you reach for this photo. You hold on to it and you pull yourself back. You don't let go, no matter what tries to stop you. Understand? She nodded. What about you? What happens to you? Don't worry about me. Just focus on getting back to your daughter. I moved to the first stone. The sun was starting to touch the horizon now, the sky turning from dark blue to purple to pink. I had maybe 10 minutes before full sunrise. I uncapped the water bottle. Sarah Watchman, I said, pouring water on the stone. Come back from the drowning place. The stone flared bright. The water disappeared. I moved to the second stone, then the third, speaking her name with each pour. By the fourth stone, I could hear movement in the wash. The water was rising, churning, and I could see Sarah's reflection in it. not standing next to me but down in the water, drowning, reaching upward. I poured water on the fifth and final stone. "Sarah, watchman, come back from the drowning place." The wash erupted. Water shot up like a geyser, and Sarah, the real Sarah standing next to me, gasped and collapsed to her knees. I held the photograph out over the edge of the wash. "Reach for it," I shouted. "Reach for your daughter." I saw her hand break the surface of that impossible water. Saw her fingers stretch toward the photo. But I also saw the other shapes surging upward, grabbing at her, trying to pull her back down. And at the bottom, watching with patient malevolence, was that tall figure with 2 long arms. Sarah's fingers closed around the edge of the photograph. I pulled, just like I'd pulled Marcus. The resistance was even worse this time, like the things in the water had learned from their mistake, were holding on tighter. But Sarah was fighting too, kicking and struggling, desperate to reach the surface. Her head broke through. She sucked in air, coughed out water. I grabbed her arm and pulled harder. That's when I felt it. A hand on my ankle. Cold, impossibly strong, with fingers that wrapped around my leg too many times to be human. I looked down and saw one of the shapes had breached the wash, had reached out of the water and grabbed hold of me. It began to pull. I fell forward, barely catching myself on the edge of the wash. The photograph slipped from my hand and fluttered down toward the water. Sarah's eyes went wide with horror. "No!" she screamed, lunging for it. Her hand caught it just before it touched the surface. And in that moment, with both of us at the very edge, I saw something that would stay with me forever. The tall figure at the bottom of the wash tilted its head, studying us. Then slowly, deliberately, it shook its head. The hand on my ankle released. I scrambled backward, dragging Sarah with me. We both crawled away from the edge, not stopping until we were back on solid ground near the vehicles. Behind us, the water was already receding, sinking back into the wash, taking those shapes with it. But the tall figure remained visible until the very end, standing in the disappearing water, watching us. Sarah was coughing up water, gasping for breath. But she was breathing. She was alive. She clutched the photograph to her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," she managed between coughs. "Thank you." I helped her to her feet. The sun was fully above the horizon now, washing away the last traces of strangeness. The stones were just stones. The wash was dry. Everything looked normal. But I knew better. I knew that down there, in the water that existed between was and will be, those things were waiting. Patient, eternal. And I knew that the tall figure had made a choice. It had let us go, not out of mercy, but for some reason I couldn't fathom. I got Sarah back to her car, called Elia and told him we were both okay, we're heading back to town. He sounded relieved and terrified in equal measure. "Don't ever do that again," he said. "I won't," I promised, and I meant it. I helped Sarah drive back to Chinle. She was weak, disoriented, but getting stronger by the minute. The water that had been in her eyes was gone. She was fully back in this world. At the hospital, they ran tests, found nothing wrong except dehydration and mild hypothermia. Couldn't explain why she'd been hypothermic when the night had been relatively warm. Didn't ask too many questions. I left Chinle that afternoon and drove straight back to Kayenta. Didn't stop, didn't look back. Just drove until I was far from Canyon Road and the wash and those 5 stones that marked the boundary between worlds. That was 6 months ago. I still work for Navajo tribal police, still drive these roads at night. But I stay away from Chinle, stay away from Canyon Road. And when I hear stories about strange lights and washes, about footprints that lead nowhere, about voices calling from dark places, I don't investigate. I let someone else handle it, because I know the truth now. I know what's waiting in those in-between spaces, in the water that isn't water. I know that there are things older than us, older than our stories, that exist in the margins of our world. Things that watch and wait and sometimes reach through. And I know that the tall figure let me go twice, but it's still down there, still waiting in the drowning place, and I don't think it will let me go a third time. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, I still hear the whispering, still feel water on my pillow that shouldn't be there, still dream of drowning in depths that have no bottom. But I'm still here, still walking this world, not trapped between. And as long as I respect the boundaries, as long as I stay away from the stones and don't look into the wash when the light is wrong, I think I'll be okay. I have to believe that, because the alternative is unthinkable. There's a particular kind of darkness on the reservation that you don't find anywhere else. I'm Reese Tsosi, 11 years with the Chinle Navajo Tribal Police, and I've learned that some nights carry more weight than others. The kind where the silence presses against your eardrums and every shadow seems deliberately placed, like the land itself is holding its breath. It was late November when this started, cold enough that frost formed on windshields overnight, but not so cold that the dirt roads had turned to ice yet. That transitional time when winter is coming but hasn't quite committed. I was on patrol with Jonah Key Yazzie, a field medic who sometimes rode along on night shifts. He was good company, knew when to talk and when to leave you alone with your thoughts. We'd worked together enough times that we had an understanding. We were heading east on one of the older dirt roads, the kind that doesn't show up on GPS, but everyone who lives out here knows by heart. The route took us past scattered hogans and mobile homes, checking on folks who lived far from town. Welfare checks mostly, making sure the elderly had enough firewood, that nobody was stranded with a broken-down vehicle, that kind of thing. Around 10 p.m., my headlights caught something unusual. A hogan about a quarter mile off the road, sitting by itself on a flat stretch of mesa. There was light coming from inside. Warm, yellow light that spilled out through the gaps around the door and the smoke hole in the roof. That wasn't necessarily strange. Plenty of people still used hogans for ceremonies, for storage, for housing when their main home got too crowded. But something about this one made me slow down. "You see that?" I asked Jonah. "Yeah, that old hogan. Didn't know anyone still used it." "You know who owns it?" Jonah squinted out the window. "I think it's the Nez family's land, but I thought that Hogan's been abandoned for years. Old man Nez died back in spring, and his kids all moved to Gallup." I pulled over and grabbed my spotlight, shining it across the mesa toward the structure. The hogan was traditional, 8-sided, built from logs and packed earth, looked to be in decent shape despite supposedly being abandoned. The door faced east, like it was supposed to. And that light inside was definitely real, not a reflection or some trick of the moon. "Want to check it out?" Jonah asked. He already had his hand on the door handle. "Might be squatters," I said. "Or kids partying. Either way, we should make sure everything's okay." We got out and started walking across the mesa. The ground was hard-packed dirt and scattered rocks. The kind of terrain that shows footprints clearly during the day. I made a mental note to check for tracks when we got closer. The night was still except for the crunch of our boots. No wind, which was unusual for this area. The mesa usually caught breezes that rolled down from the mountains, but tonight the air was motionless, almost thick. Our breath came out in visible clouds that hung in front of our faces for longer than seemed natural. As we got closer to the hogan, I could see that the light inside was coming from a lantern or possibly a fire. The glow flickered slightly, casting moving shadows on the interior walls. I couldn't hear voices or movement from inside, but that wasn't necessarily concerning. Thick walls muffled sound. About 20 feet from the door, I stopped. Something was bothering me, some detail my brain had registered but hadn't fully processed yet. I played my flashlight across the ground around the hogan, looking for what had triggered my instinct. Then I saw it. Or rather, I saw what wasn't there. The ground around the structure was undisturbed. No footprints leading to or from the door. No tire tracks from a vehicle. No signs that anyone had approached the hogan recently. But the light inside was clearly burning, which meant someone had to be in there. Someone had to have walked across this mesa, gone through that door, started that fire. "Jonah," I said quietly, "you see any tracks?" He'd been looking at the hogan, but now his gaze dropped to the ground. He walked in a slow circle, checking the perimeter. When he came back to me, his expression was troubled. "Nothing," he said. "Not a single print. But there's someone inside, has to be. Maybe the wind covered them. There's no wind, hasn't been all night." We stood there for a moment, both of us trying to make sense of what we were seeing. Then I made a decision. "I'm going to knock, see who answers." I adjusted my radio volume. "If anything seems off, you get back to the unit and call for backup. You sure about this?" I wasn't, but it was my job to check on things that didn't make sense, to investigate situations that raised questions, even when those questions made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I approached the door carefully, my hand near my weapon. The wood was weathered but solid, with traditional designs carved into the frame. I could hear something from inside now, not voices, but a sound like fabric rustling, like someone shifting position. I knocked 3 times. "Navajo Tribal Police, is anyone in there?" The rustling stopped. Complete silence from inside. I knocked again. "This is Navajo Tribal Police. We saw your light and wanted to make sure everything was okay. Can you come to the door, please?" Still nothing. But the light inside was still burning, still flickering slightly. Someone was definitely in there. I tried the door. It wasn't locked, swung inward easily on old but well-maintained hinges. The interior of the hogan was immediately visible. It was a single room, maybe 15 feet across, with a packed dirt floor and a fire pit in the center. But there was no fire in the pit. Instead, an old-style lantern sat on a wooden chair near the back wall, its flame burning steady and bright. And the hogan was empty, completely empty except for that one chair and the lantern. I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping every corner. No one. No storage, no bedding, no supplies. Just bare walls, bare floor, that single chair with the lantern on it. The chair itself was unusual, old, hand-carved, with a design on the back that looked like intertwining snakes or vines, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't see much anymore. "Clear," I called to Jonah. He came to the doorway but didn't enter. "Where'd they go?" "No idea. But look at this." I pointed to the ground in the center of the hogan. There, in the dirt floor, were marks. Not footprints exactly, but impressions. Like someone had been sitting in the middle of the floor for a long time, long enough to compress the dirt. And around those impressions the dirt was disturbed in a perfect circle, like someone had drawn a line with their finger. But there were no footprints leading to those impressions. No tracks showing how someone had entered the hogan, sat down, then left. Just the marks themselves, isolated in the middle of the floor. Jonah noticed it too. "That's not possible," he said. "Someone had to walk in there, had to walk out." "I know what it should look like," I said. "But look around. You see any prints?" We both checked. The floor was dusty enough that prints would show clearly. And there were marks, the impressions in the center, some scuff marks near the walls that could have been anything. But no clear footprints. No path from the door to the center of the room where someone had obviously been sitting. I looked at the chair with the lantern more closely. It had been pulled out from against the wall. There were drag marks in the dirt showing where it had moved. But again, no footprints near it. No indication of who had moved it or when. "This doesn't make sense," Jonah said. He was standing just outside the doorway, like he didn't want to commit to coming inside. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." I walked over to the lantern and held my hand near the glass. Still warm. The fuel reservoir was 3/4 full. Someone had lit this recently within the past hour or two, but how they'd gotten in and out without leaving prints was beyond me. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, but getting stronger. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, but it was distinctive. Like sage and something else, something metallic and sharp. I couldn't place it, but it made my stomach tighten. "You smell that?" I asked Jonah. He sniffed the air. "Yeah. Sage, maybe? Could be someone was doing ceremony here." But if they were doing ceremony, where are they, and how'd they leave? We had no answer for that. I took photos of everything with my phone. The chair, the lantern, the impressions in the floor, the lack of footprints. Evidence of something, even if I didn't know what. "We should check the area," I said. "Maybe there's another entrance, some way someone could have gotten in that we're not seeing." We walked around the perimeter of the hogan. The structure was solid. No hidden doors, no gaps in the walls big enough for a person to slip through. The only entrance was the one we'd used. And outside, the ground was still undisturbed. No tracks anywhere within 100 feet of the structure. Jonah crouched down and examined the dirt near the door. "Reese, look at this." I joined him. He was pointing at the ground just outside the threshold. There were marks there, very faint. Not footprints, but something else. It looked like the dirt had been smoothed somehow, brushed clean. And when I looked closer, I could see a pattern in the brushing. Deliberate strokes, all moving in the same direction, away from the door. "Someone swept the tracks away," I said. "But with what and when? We've been standing here for the past 10 minutes. Nobody came out." He was right. We would have seen anyone leaving. Unless they'd left before we arrived, which meant they would have had to see us coming, extinguish the lantern, and somehow escape without leaving any evidence. The timeline didn't work. I radioed in our status. "Unit 4 to dispatch. We're checking an occupied hogan on the Nez property, east of mile marker 18. No immediate concerns, but the situation is unusual. Can you confirm any active ceremonies or gatherings in this area tonight?" Static crackled back at me. Then Marla Nez's voice, different Nez family, no relation to the property owners. "Unit 4, checking. Stand by." While we waited, I noticed something else. The door to the hogan, which I'd left standing open, had moved. Just slightly, but definitely moved. It was more closed than it had been a minute ago. There was still no wind. Nothing to push it. "Did you touch the door?" I asked Jonah. "No, why? It moved." We both stared at it. As we watched, it moved again. Slowly, smoothly, closing inch by inch like someone was pulling it from inside. But we could see inside. There was nobody there. Nobody to be pulling on the door. Jonah backed up a step. "Reese, we should go." "Wait," I said. Something was happening, and every instinct I had said I needed to understand what it was before we left. The door continued closing until it was almost completely shut. Then it stopped. For maybe 10 seconds, everything was still. Then, from inside the hogan, we heard a sound. It was like a sigh. Not quite human, but not quite wind either. Long, slow, carrying a note of something that might have been sadness or might have been relief. And with it came a rush of cold air from inside the structure. Air that smelled like earth and water, and that same metallic sharpness. The door swung open again, revealing the empty interior. The lantern was still burning. The chair was still there. But the impressions in the floor were gone. The dirt in the center of the room was smooth and undisturbed, like nobody had sat there in years. My radio crackled. "Unit 4, dispatch. We have no record of any ceremonies scheduled for that area. Property is listed as uninhabited. Do you need backup?" I stared at the empty hogan, at the impossible smoothness of that floor, at the lantern that was still burning for no one. "Unit 4, negative on backup. We're going to secure the premises and return to patrol." "Copy that, Unit 4. I walked back into the hogan. The smell was gone now, replaced by the normal sense of old wood and earth. I picked up the lantern. It was lighter than it should have been, the fuel reservoir now nearly empty, even though it had been 3/4 full just minutes ago. I extinguished the flame and carried the lantern outside. "We're taking this with us," I told Jonah. "Something to show the sergeant, something physical." He nodded, clearly relieved to be leaving. We walked back to the unit in silence, both of us glancing back at the hogan every few steps. The structure sat there in the darkness, looking abandoned and innocent, giving no sign of the impossibilities it contained. It wasn't until we were back in the truck, doors locked, engine running, that Jonah finally spoke. "What do you think that was?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm going to find out." I looked at the lantern sitting on the seat between us. In the dim light of the cab, I could see something I hadn't noticed before. There were words carved into the base, worn almost smooth with age. I tilted it toward the overhead light to read them. The language wasn't English, wasn't Navajo either, though it used similar characters. But I could make out one word that sent a chill through me. It was a name, Chindi. Jonah saw it too. His face went pale. "Reese, that word, I know what it means," I said quietly. In traditional belief, a Chindi was the part of a person that remained behind after death. Not a spirit exactly, but an echo. The darker parts of someone's nature, the things they left unresolved. And places where people died could be contaminated by Chindi, making them dangerous to the living. "The hogan's been abandoned since Old Man Nez died," Jonah said. "You think he died in there?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." I put the truck in gear and headed back toward town. Behind us, the hogan's silhouette faded into the darkness, but I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that impossible light burning again. It didn't, but somehow that made it worse. The sergeant's reaction when I showed him the lantern the next morning was about what I expected. Skeptical curiosity mixed with the kind of patience you develop after years of hearing unusual reports from night shift officers. "You're telling me you found this burning in an abandoned hogan, but there was nobody there. No footprints, no tracks, no sign of how anyone got in or out." "That's exactly what I'm telling you," I said. Sergeant Nakai picked up the lantern and examined it. He was older, maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face that came from decades working outdoors. He'd been with tribal police since before I was born, had seen just about everything the reservation could throw at someone. "And you checked the whole area? Made sure nobody was hiding nearby?" We circled the hogan twice, checked for other entrances, looked for hidden doors. Nothing. Just the one way in and out, and no tracks around it. He set the lantern down and pulled out his reading glasses to look at the carved base. His expression changed slightly when he saw the word. "Where on the Nez property was this?" "Maybe 1/4 mile off the east road, past marker 18. The old hogan, the one that's been empty since spring." Nakai was quiet for a moment. Then he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Old Man Nez didn't just die, Reese. He died in that hogan. Alone. His kids found him about a week after the fact. Maybe longer. Hot spring day, door was closed. You can imagine the condition of things." I felt my stomach turn. Nobody mentioned that in any reports, because it wasn't our case. Natural causes, no sign of foul play. Family handled it privately, did the cleansing ceremony, boarded up the place. Or they were supposed to. He looked at the lantern again. This shouldn't be there. That hogan should be empty. Nobody should be going near it. But someone lit this lantern recently, within hours of when we found it. Or something did, Nakai said quietly. We looked at each other. He knew I'd heard the word carved in the base, knew what it implied, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud in the bright fluorescent light of the station, where everything was supposed to make sense. I want you to talk to Atsidi Benali, Nakai finally said. He does cleansing ceremonies sometimes, works with families when there's been a death. He might know something about the Nez Hogan, whether the proper protocols were followed. You believe me? About what we saw? Nakai leaned back in his chair. Reese, I've been working this reservation for 40 years. I've seen things that don't make it into reports, heard stories that sound crazy until you experience something similar yourself. Do I think you saw exactly what you say you saw? Yeah, I do. Do I understand it? No, but Atsidi might. He knows the old ways better than most of us. I found Atsidi Benali at his home that afternoon. He lived in a small house on the western edge of Chinle, with a well-maintained yard and a traditional hogan out back that he used for ceremonies. He was outside chopping wood when I pulled up, moving with the efficient economy of someone who'd been doing physical work his whole life. Officer Tsosi, he said when he saw me. Don't often get visits from the police in daylight. Something wrong? Maybe. I need to ask you about a death ceremony. Old man Nez from last spring. His expression shifted immediately. What about it? The hogan where he died. Was it properly cleansed? Were all the protocols followed? Atsidi set down his axe and gestured toward the house. Come inside. This isn't a conversation to have where others might hear. His home was comfortable, filled with traditional crafts and family photos. He made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table before he spoke again. The Nez family asked me to do the ceremony, he said, but they wanted it done quickly. Wanted to cut corners because the proper ceremony takes 4 days and costs money they said they didn't have. I told them that wasn't how it worked, that you can't rush these things. The chindi has to be properly sent away. The space has to be cleansed. Specific rituals have to be performed in the correct order. And they thanked me for my time and hired someone else, someone younger who didn't know the old ways as well, who said he could do it in 1 day for half the price. Atsidi's face was grim. I warned them, told them what could happen if it wasn't done right, but they didn't listen. Young people never do. What happens if the ceremony isn't done correctly? He took a long sip of coffee before answering. The chindi doesn't leave. It stays in the place where the person died, confused, angry, replaying the last moments. And sometimes, if the person died badly, alone, afraid, in pain, the chindi is strong enough to affect the physical world. Move objects, create illusions, try to communicate. We found a lantern burning in that hogan last night. Old lantern with a word carved in the base, chindi. Atsidi set down his cup carefully. And were there footprints? Signs of who lit it? No. The ground around the hogan was completely undisturbed, but someone had been sitting in the center of the room. There were impressions in the dirt, like they'd been there for hours, and a chair had been moved, but no tracks showing how they got in or out. That's not someone, Reese. That's something. The chindi is strong enough to manifest, to create physical effects. He paused. Did you feel anything unusual? Cold spots, strange smells, sense of being watched? All of that. And the door moved on its own. The impressions in the floor vanished while we watched. Atsidi closed his eyes and muttered something in Navajo that I didn't quite catch. When he opened them again, he looked older, more tired. The hogan is contaminated. It should be abandoned, torn down even. But the chindi won't leave until the proper ceremony is completed. Until then, it will try to attract attention, try to draw people in. It's confused, doesn't understand that it's no longer fully part of this world. Is it dangerous? That depends. Most chindi are just echoes, shadows. They can frighten but not harm. But if this one is strong enough to light lanterns and move objects, he shook his head, then yes, it could be dangerous, especially to people who are sensitive, who are open to that kind of influence. Like field medics? I thought of Jonah, how reluctant he'd been to enter the Hogan. Like anyone who works closely with death or illness. Anyone whose job puts them in contact with the boundary places. Atsidi looked at me intently. You need to stay away from that Hogan, Reese. Don't go back there, and don't let anyone else go there either. I'm a police officer. If there's a disturbance, I have to respond. Then take precautions. Carry corn pollen, don't enter the structure after dark. And whatever you do, don't accept anything the chindi offers. Don't take anything from the Hogan, don't let it give you anything. I thought about the lantern sitting in an evidence bag back at the station. I already took the lantern. His face went pale. You brought it with you? Back to the station? It's evidence. I had to document what we found. Reese, that lantern is a connection. By taking it, you've established a link between yourself and the chindi. It will know you now, will recognize you. If you go back to that Hogan, it will be expecting you. A chill ran down my spine. What do I do? Bring the lantern back, tonight, before it gets too dark. Put it exactly where you found it, and then leave. Don't look back. Don't respond if you hear anything. Just leave. And then I'll talk to the Nez family, convince them to let me do the proper ceremony. It's the only way to truly clean that space. He stood up, a sign that our conversation was over. But Reese, if the chindi appears to you before I can do the ceremony, if you see something that looks like Old Man Nez, you need to understand that it's not him. It's just the echo, the leftover parts. Don't trust anything it says. Don't follow any guidance it offers. Just get away as fast as you can. I drove back to the station with my mind churning. Everything Atsidi had said made a certain kind of sense. But it was the kind of sense that existed outside normal police work, outside the realm of evidence and procedure. How was I supposed to write a report about this? How was I supposed to explain to Nakai that we needed to return a piece of evidence because it was cursed? But when I got back to the station, that decision was already made for me. The evidence locker where I'd stored the lantern was open. The bag was there, the evidence tag intact, but the lantern itself was gone. In its place was a note, written in shaky handwriting on old paper. Come back when the light returns. Come alone. Questions need answers. Nobody on duty had seen anyone near the locker. The security footage showed nothing, just the bag sitting there one moment, then a strange blur across the camera, then the bag empty. Like someone had deleted frames, but the timestamp was continuous. I showed the note to Nakai. He read it twice, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You're going back out there tonight, aren't you? I don't have much choice. Someone, or something, has specifically requested my presence. If I don't go, who knows what happens next? Take backup. The note says, come alone. Notes, written by entities that steal evidence from locked lockers, don't get to make the rules, Reese. But we both knew I'd go alone. Because whatever was happening at that Hogan, it had chosen me for a reason. And the only way to understand that reason was to face it directly. I spent the rest of the day preparing. Filled a small pouch with corn pollen that my grandmother had given me years ago, made sure my flashlight was fully charged, checked my radio twice. normal procedures for dealing with very abnormal situations. Jonah found me before I left. "I heard you're going back out there. I'm coming with you." "No," I said, "you're not." "Reese, we're partners. You don't get to shut me out. This isn't about shutting you out. It's about—" I struggled to find the right words. Atsidi said that people who work with death and illness are more vulnerable to this kind of thing. That's you, Jonah. You're a field medic. You're exactly the kind of person who shouldn't be anywhere near that Hogan. He wanted to argue. I could see it in his face. But finally he just nodded. "You be careful then, and keep your radio on. If I don't hear from you every 15 minutes, I'm calling in backup whether you like it or not." "Deal," I said. I headed out to the Hogan just as the sun was starting to set, that golden hour when the light turns everything amber and shadows grow long. I wanted to arrive before full dark, wanted to at least have twilight on my side when I faced whatever was waiting for me. The mesa looked different in the fading light. The Hogan stood alone against the darkening sky, looking smaller somehow, more vulnerable. And as I drove closer, I saw that the light was burning inside again. That same warm yellow glow, flickering slightly, impossible and inevitable. I parked my unit and grabbed my flashlight and the bag of corn pollen. The ground around the Hogan was still smooth, still undisturbed. But now I could see why. Every few minutes a breeze would rise from nowhere, just a small gust that lasted exactly long enough to erase any marks in the dirt. Then it would stop, the air would go still, and the cycle would repeat. The chindi was actively covering its tracks, actively maintaining the illusion of emptiness. I approached the door carefully, corn pollen clutched in my left hand, right hand near my weapon, even though I knew a gun would be useless here. The door was standing open, inviting, and I could see the interior clearly. The lantern was back on the chair, burning bright. The impressions were back in the center of the floor, deeper now, more defined. And sitting cross-legged in those impressions, exactly as I'd suspected I'd find him, was old man Nez. Or rather, what was left of him. He looked solid enough at first glance. An old man in traditional clothing, sitting cross-legged on the dirt floor, hands folded in his lap. But as my eyes adjusted to the lantern light, I started to see the wrongness. His edges were slightly blurred, like an old photograph losing focus. And he wasn't quite touching the ground. There was maybe an inch of space between him and the dirt, like he was floating just above the surface. His eyes opened when I stepped through the doorway. They were dark, impossibly dark, with no reflection from the lantern light, like looking into deep water at night. "Officer Tsosi," he said. His voice was thin, distant, like it was being carried from far away. "You came back." I didn't respond immediately. Atsidi's warnings were fresh in my mind. Don't trust anything it says. Don't engage more than necessary. Just get the answers and leave. "You left a note," I said carefully. "Said you had questions that needed answers." "Questions," he repeated. "Yes. So many questions." He tilted his head, and the movement was too fluid, too smooth. Why did they leave me? My children. Why did they rush the ceremony? Why was I not important enough for them to do things properly? This wasn't what I expected. I thought he'd ask about his death, about what came after, but instead he was focused on what his family had done, on the incomplete ceremony. "Your children made a choice," I said. "Maybe not the right choice, but it was theirs to make. A choice that left me here, trapped between worlds. Not fully gone, but not fully present." His form flickered slightly like a candle flame in a draft. "Do you know what that's like, officer? To be aware, but not able to act? To exist in a space that's neither life nor death?" "No," I said honestly. "I don't." It's lonely, so very lonely. I sit here in the place where I died, replaying those last moments, the pain in my chest, the knowledge that I was alone, the fear that no one would find me in time. His voice dropped even lower. And now I understand that I was right to be afraid. Because even though they found my body, they didn't find me. The real me. The part that's still here. I wanted to feel sympathy for him, but I couldn't forget what Atsidi had said. This wasn't really Old Man Nez, this was just the echo. The leftover parts, the confusion and anger and fear he'd felt in his final moments. The Chindi. There's someone who can help, I said. Atsidi Benali. He knows the proper ceremonies. He can help you move on. Move on to where? The Chindi's eyes seemed to grow darker. I'm not meant to move on. I'm meant to stay here, to wait, to watch. That's not true. You're stuck because the ceremony wasn't completed, but it can be. Atsidi can finish what was started. And if I don't want him to, if I prefer to stay here? That was a question I hadn't considered. What if the Chindi didn't want to leave? What if it had adapted to its existence between worlds, found a kind of terrible comfort in the familiarity of this place? Why did you bring me here? I asked instead of answering. Why specifically ask for me? The Chindi was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become more layered, like multiple people speaking slightly out of sync. Because you see clearly. You saw the footprints that weren't there. You saw the chair that had moved. You saw that something was wrong. Most people, they would have convinced themselves it was nothing, that they'd imagined the inconsistencies. But not you. You're a seeker of truth. And what truth are you trying to show me? That death is not an ending. That we persist in some form whether we're wanted or not. Whether we're properly mourned or not. The Chindi rose from the ground, or rather, floated upward, his legs never unfolding, his position never changing. You work with death, Officer Sosi. You see its aftermath, investigate its causes. But have you ever really understood what it means? What it leaves behind? I backed up a step, my hand tightening on the bag of corn pollen. This was going in a direction I didn't like. The Chindi wasn't just trying to communicate, it was trying to teach me something, to make me understand its perspective. I understand enough, I said. I understand that you're in pain, that you're trapped, that you need help moving on. Moving on, the Chindi repeated, almost mockingly. Everyone speaks of moving on as if there's somewhere to go, as if the universe has a plan for incomplete souls like mine. But what if there's nowhere to go? What if this is all there is, this endless moment of awareness without purpose? My radio crackled. Jonah's voice came through, distorted by static. Unit 4, checking in. You okay out there? I pulled the radio from my belt, keeping my eyes on the Chindi. Unit 4, I'm fine. At the location conducting interview. Copy that, you sound weird. You sure everything's okay? Affirmative. We'll check in again in 15. I put the radio away. The Chindi was watching me with those dark, unreflective eyes. You have people who care about you, it said. People who check on you, who worry. I had that once, before they rushed the ceremony. Before they decided that saving money was more important than doing things right. It wasn't about the money, I said, though I had no way of knowing if that was true. It was probably about grief, about wanting to move past the pain quickly. People make mistakes when they're hurting. Mistakes, the Chindi echoed. Such a small word for something that has such large consequences. The lantern flickered. The shadows in the hogan grew longer, darker, and I realized with sudden clarity that the sun had fully set while we'd been talking. Full darkness had fallen outside, and I was alone in this contaminated space with an entity that might or might not mean me harm. "I need to go," I said, "but I promise I'll help you. I'll make sure Atsidi comes, that the proper ceremony is completed. You don't have to stay trapped here." "Don't I?" The Chindi drifted closer, not threatening exactly, but definitely moving into my personal space. "What if I told you that I've found a kind of peace here, that in this liminal space between death and whatever comes after, I've learned things, understood truths that the living can't comprehend?" "Like what?" "Like the fact that all those old stories are true. The ones we tell children, the ones we've convinced ourselves are just metaphors. They're not. There are thin places where worlds touch. There are beings that exist in the spaces between. And death is not an ending, it's a transition, a doorway that only opens one way for most people. But for those of us who get stuck, who exist in the margins..." The Chindi's form flickered again, this time deliberately, showing me the truth of its existence. We can see both sides, can move between them in limited ways. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand. What you saw last night, the footprints that vanished, the impressions that couldn't be explained, that was just the beginning. There are other thin places on this reservation, other doorways, other entities trapped between worlds, and some of them are not as benign as me." A chill ran down my spine. How many? More than you'd want to know. Fewer than there used to be. The old ways kept them in check, kept the boundaries strong. But as people forget the ceremonies, as they take shortcuts and rush the rituals, the boundaries weaken. Things slip through. Things that shouldn't be able to touch the living world. And you're warning me about this, why? Out of the goodness of your heart? The Chindi laughed, a sound like wind through empty rooms. "I have no heart, Officer Tsosi. Not anymore. But I have awareness, and I have memory of what it was like to be human, and I remember that humans help each other. So I'm helping you. Consider it my last act of humanity." "Your last act before what?" "Before I stop being even this much of who I was. Chindi don't last forever. We fade eventually, become less than echoes, more like shadows of shadows. I can feel it happening already, bits of my memory dissolving, pieces of my personality wearing away. Soon, I'll be nothing but a cold spot in an empty hogan, a place where people feel inexplicably sad for reasons they can't explain." For the first time, I felt genuine pity for this thing. Whatever Old Man Nez had been in life, what remained of him was aware enough to understand its own dissolution, conscious enough to fear the final fading. "That's why you need the ceremony," I said gently. "Not to move on to some reward or punishment, but to end this, to finally rest." "Perhaps," the Chindi said. "Or perhaps I'm just lonely and wanted someone to talk to who wouldn't run away screaming, who would listen, even if they didn't fully understand." The lantern flickered again. This time, when it steadied, the Chindi was sitting back in the center of the floor, in exactly the position I'd first seen it. "Go now, Officer Tsosi. Tell Atsidi Benali that I'm ready. Tell him that I won't resist the ceremony this time. Tell him," the voice faded, grew even more distant. "Tell him I'm sorry for being stubborn. Sorry for holding on when I should have let go." I wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease its suffering. But what comfort could I offer to something that existed outside the normal rules of life and death? "I'll tell him," I said simply. I turned and walked out of the hogan. The night air hit me like a splash of cold water, shocking me back to the reality of the living world. I didn't look back, Didn't check to see if the Chindi was watching me leave. I just walked steadily back to my unit, got inside, and locked the doors. Only when I was safely enclosed in metal and glass and the familiar trappings of the modern world did I allow myself to shake. To acknowledge how profoundly unsettling that conversation had been. To admit that I'd been speaking with something that should not exist, should not be possible. My radio crackled. Unit 4, status check. I grabbed it. Unit 4, interview complete. Returning to station. Copy that. You really okay? You sound shaken. Yeah, I said. Just, yeah. I'll brief you when I get back. I started the engine and pulled away from the mesa. In my rearview mirror, I could see the Hogan, still glowing with that impossible light. But as I watched, the light began to dim. Not flickering, not going out suddenly, but fading gradually like someone turning down a lamp. By the time I reached the main road, the Hogan was dark, empty again, waiting for Atsidi to come and finally lay its resident spirit to rest. Or so I hoped. Atsidi Benali performed the full 4-day ceremony 3 days later. The Nez family agreed to pay for it this time, properly, after I explained what I'd seen and what their father had said. They were skeptical at first. Modern people always are. But the weight of guilt is a powerful motivator. They'd cut corners once and paid for it in sleepless nights and lingering unease. They weren't going to make the same mistake twice. I attended the ceremony on the final day, standing outside the Hogan with the family, while Atsidi completed the final rituals inside. He'd spent days preparing, gathering the right materials, performing preliminary rites to strengthen himself against whatever he might encounter. Now, in the morning light with the sun just cresting the eastern horizon, he was finishing what should have been done 6 months ago. The door to the Hogan opened, and Atsidi emerged, looking tired but satisfied. He carried the lantern with him, the one that had started all of this. In the daylight it looked ordinary, just an old piece of equipment with no particular significance. "It's done," he said simply. "The space is clean. The Chindi has been released." "Where did it go?" asked one of the Nez children, a woman in her 30s with her father's eyes. "Where all spirits go when they're properly sent away. Back into the cycle, back into the flow of things. The details aren't important. What matters is that your father is at peace now, and this place is safe again." He handed the lantern to the woman. "This was your father's. He carved his concerns into the base, his fears about what might happen if things weren't done right. He was a wise man, even at the end. You should keep this, remember the lessons it taught." She took it carefully, turning it over to look at the carved word on the base. "Chindi," she read aloud. "He knew. He always knew," Atsidi said. "He told you before he died what needed to be done. You just weren't ready to hear it." The family left after thanking Atsidi, promising to care for the Hogan properly, to use it only for good purposes or leave it alone entirely. I stayed behind, wanting to ask questions that I couldn't ask in front of civilians. "Was it really Old Man Nez that I spoke to?" I asked when we were alone. "Or just an echo of him? Does it matter?" Atsidi countered. "It had his memories, his personality, his concerns. Whether it was him or a perfect copy of his last moments, how would you tell the difference?" I guess I couldn't. The universe is stranger than we think, Reese. We draw these clear lines between life and death, between real and unreal, between possible and impossible. But the truth is messier than that. There are gray areas everywhere, spaces where the rules we think we understand don't quite apply. The Chindi mentioned other thin places, other entities trapped between worlds. Atsidi nodded slowly, and he was right. This reservation has a long history, and not all deaths are properly handled. Not all spirits move on the way they should. You'll encounter more of these situations if you keep working night shifts, keep patrolling the back roads. Should I be worried? Worried? No. Prepared? Yes. He pulled a small pouch from his pocket and handed it to me. Corn pollen. Keep it with you always. If you encounter something that doesn't feel right, sprinkle it around yourself in a circle. It won't protect you from everything, but it helps maintain boundaries, keeps certain things from getting too close. I took the pouch. It was heavier than I expected, filled with fine yellow powder that smelled faintly sweet. Thank you. Thank you for calling me when you did, for taking this seriously instead of dismissing it. A lot of officers wouldn't have. He looked back at the Hogan, now standing quiet and innocent in the morning sun. A lot of officers would have convinced themselves they'd imagined the whole thing. I couldn't do that, not after what I saw. Good. The world needs more people who see clearly, who don't look away from uncomfortable truths. He started walking toward his truck. But Reese, be careful. Sometimes seeing clearly means seeing things you wish you hadn't. Things that will follow you, change how you understand the world. There's a cost to that kind of awareness. I watched him drive away, then turned back to look at the Hogan one more time. It looked different now, lighter somehow. The oppressive feeling that had hung around it was gone, replaced by the normal quiet of an empty structure on an empty mesa. But I knew I'd never be able to look at abandoned buildings quite the same way again. Would always wonder what might be lingering inside, what echoes of the past might be waiting in the shadows. I drove back to Chinle thinking about everything Atsidi had said, about thin places and gray areas, about the cost of seeing clearly. And I wondered how many other officers had encountered situations like this, had seen things that didn't fit into their understanding of how the world worked. Had they reported them? Or had they followed the easier path, convinced themselves it was nothing, filed reports that carefully omitted the impossible details? Jonah was waiting for me at the station. He took one look at my face and nodded. Bad? Different, I said. But it's over now. The ceremony worked. Good. He paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you went alone. I don't think I could have handled what you described. You would have if you'd had to. That's what we do. We went back to our normal routine after that. Patrol shifts, traffic stops, welfare checks, the usual rhythm of police work. But I found myself paying more attention to the details now, looking more carefully at situations that seemed slightly off, checking for footprints that shouldn't be there, listening for sounds that didn't quite make sense. And I started hearing stories from other officers. Quiet conversations in the break room, late-night discussions on long patrol shifts. Everyone had encountered something at some point. Lights that moved in patterns that didn't fit any known aircraft. Sounds from empty buildings, cold spots on warm nights. Small impossibilities that added up to a larger truth. The world was stranger than most people wanted to admit. And out here on the reservation, where old traditions still held power, and the modern world hadn't quite erased everything that came before, that strangeness was closer to the surface. More visible, harder to ignore. 3 weeks after the ceremony, I was driving past the Nez property and decided to check on the Hogan. Just to satisfy my curiosity, to confirm that everything was still quiet. The structure sat peaceful in the afternoon sun, door closed, looking like it had been there for 100 years and would be there for 100 more. I walked around the perimeter, checking the ground. No footprints except mine. No signs of disturbance. Nothing unusual at all. I stood at the door for a moment, my hand on the weathered wood. Part of me wanted to go inside, to see if I could still feel any echo of what had been there. But a wiser part told me to leave it alone, to let sleeping spirits lie. I was turning to leave when I noticed something carved into the door frame. Fresh carving, done recently with a sharp knife. 5 words in careful, deliberate letters. Thank you for listening clearly. I touched the letters lightly. They were deep, deliberate, impossible. The ceremony had been completed weeks ago. The Chindi should have been gone, released, at peace. There was no one who could have carved this message, unless Old Man Nez had found a way, in those final moments before the ceremony took hold, to leave one last mark, one final communication. I stood there for a long time, my fingers tracing those carved words, thinking about all the conversations I'd had about gray areas and unclear boundaries, about spirits and echoes, and the cost of seeing clearly. Finally, I pulled out my own knife and added 5 more words below his, "Rest well, Old Man Nez." Then I walked back to my unit and drove away. I didn't look back, didn't need to. Whatever had been trapped in that hogan was gone now, truly and finally gone. Or so I told myself. But sometimes on the quietest nights when I'm driving past that stretch of mesa, I see a light burning in the window of the hogan. Just for a moment, just a brief flicker. And I wonder if Atsidi's ceremony really worked, or if it just changed what the Chindi was, gave it a different kind of existence. And I wonder what else might be out there trapped in other hogans, other buildings, other thin places where worlds touch. How many other echoes are waiting to be heard, to be acknowledged, to finally be released? I carry the corn pollen with me now, always. Keep it in my shirt pocket where I can reach it quickly if I need to. And I pay attention to the details. Look for the inconsistencies that most people miss. Because someone has to see clearly. Someone has to witness these impossibilities and acknowledge them for what they are. Not threats, necessarily, but reminders that the universe is larger and stranger than we understand. That death is not an ending so much as a transformation. That what we think we know about reality is just the thinnest surface layer over depths we can't begin to fathom. The carved message in the hogan's doorframe stayed there for about a month. Then one morning I drove past, and it was gone, smoothed over, like it had never existed at all. Just blank weathered wood. No sign of either Old Man Nez's message or my response. But I know what I saw, know what I carved. And I know that somewhere, in some space between worlds, an old man who died alone and afraid finally found peace. Or at least, I hope he did. Because the alternative, that the Chindi is still there, still watching, still waiting, is something I try very hard not to think about. Especially on the quiet nights, especially when I'm alone. There are some calls that show up in your logbook every year like clockwork, and after a while, you start to recognize the pattern even if you don't understand it. I'm Calvin Nesba, and I've been with the Chinle Navajo Tribal Police for 8 years now. Long enough to see things repeat themselves in ways that don't make sense on paper, but out here on the reservation, patterns mean something even when you can't explain them. It was early November when I first noticed it. I was going through old dispatch records during a slow afternoon, cross-referencing missing person reports with locations, trying to see if there were any clusters we'd missed. That's when I saw it. November 8th, every single year for the past 6 years, a missing person call came in from the same location, mile marker 73 on Route 191. About 30 miles north of Chinle, where the road cuts through some of the most isolated country on the reservation. The thing that made my skin prickle was simple. I'd driven that stretch of road hundreds of times. There was no mile marker 73. The markers jumped from 72 to 74, and I'd noticed it before but never thought much about it. Roads get renumbered, markers get moved or removed, It happens. But 6 years of calls from a marker that didn't exist? That was something else. I pulled up each report and laid them out on my desk. Different callers every time, different names, but the same basic story. Someone was lost, disoriented, couldn't find their way back to the main road. Dispatch would send units out, and by the time they arrived, there'd be no one there. No abandoned vehicles, no footprints, nothing. The calls would get filed as false reports or pocket dials, and everyone would move on. Except they kept happening. Same date, same location, same result. My rookie deputy, Leighton Chi, walked into the office carrying 2 cups of coffee from the gas station down the road. He was fresh out of the academy, maybe 23 years old, still had that eagerness that hadn't been worn down by years of long nights and unsolved cases. He set one of the cups on my desk and looked at the printouts I had spread out. "What's all this?" he asked. "Missing person reports," I said. "All from the same location, all on the same day of the year." Leighton picked up one of the reports and scanned it. "November 8th, that's tomorrow." "I know." He set the paper down and looked at me. "You think something's going to happen?" "I think something happens every year," I said. "And I think tomorrow night we're going to be out there when it does." The sun was already setting by the time we finished our shift that day, painting the mesas in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I hadn't been thinking about those reports. I drove home to my place on the edge of town, a small house I'd bought a few years back when I decided I was staying in Chinle for the long haul. My daughter was at her mother's place in Ganado, so the house was empty except for me and the silence. I made myself dinner, rice and mutton stew that I'd reheated from a batch my aunt had made over the weekend, and sat at my kitchen table going through the reports again. I'd photocopied them all and brought them home, which probably wasn't strictly by the book, but this felt personal in a way I couldn't quite explain. Each caller had given a different reason for being out there. One was looking for a lost dog. Another said they'd pulled over because their truck was overheating. A third claimed they'd seen someone walking along the side of the road and stopped to offer help. But they all said the same thing about the location: mile marker 73. And they all described the same feeling of confusion, of time slipping away from them, of not being able to find their way back even though the road was right there. I pulled up a map on my laptop and marked the location where mile marker 73 should have been. It was a straight stretch of road, nothing remarkable about it. No intersections, no turnoffs, just highway cutting through open country with mesas rising in the distance. But when I zoomed in on the satellite view, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. About 100 yards off the west side of the road there was a structure. It was hard to make out in the image, just a dark rectangle that could have been a hogan or an old sheep shelter, but it was there. And around it, the ground looked disturbed, like vehicle tracks cutting through the scrub. I wrote down the coordinates and closed my laptop. Tomorrow night, Leighton and I would be out there. And maybe, for the first time in 6 years, someone would be there to answer when that call came in. The next morning came cold and clear. November on the reservation meant mornings where your breath fogged in the air, and the sun took its time burning through the chill. I got to the station early, before Leighton, and found Marlinez already at the dispatch desk nursing a cup of coffee that smelled like it had been sitting there since midnight. "You're in early," she said without looking up from her computer. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "You working tonight?" "Double shift. Tanya called in sick." She finally looked at me, her dark eyes sharp despite the early hour. "Why?" I told her about the reports, about the pattern, about mile marker 73. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My grandmother used to talk about places like that. Places where the world gets thin, where things slip through. She said you could tell them by the way time moved different there, by the way you'd lose track of where you were even on a road you'd driven 1,000 times. You believe that? She shrugged. I believe there are things we don't understand, and I believe patterns mean something. She turned back to her computer. If a call comes in tonight from that location, you'll be the first to know. Layton arrived 20 minutes later, and we spent the morning on routine patrol. A domestic dispute in Chinle, a broken-down truck on Route 7, a wellness check on an elderly man whose nephew hadn't heard from him in a few days. The old man was fine, just had his phone turned off because he was tired of spam calls. Normal stuff. The kind of work that reminds you most days are just days, nothing strange about them. But as the afternoon wore on, and the sun started its descent toward the western mesas, I felt something building in my chest. Anticipation mixed with unease. Layton must have sensed it because he kept glancing over at me as we drove back toward Chinle. You really think something's going to happen tonight? He asked. I don't know, I said honestly. But we're going to find out. We grabbed dinner at the station, sandwiches from the convenience store down the road, and waited. The sun set, and the reservation transformed into a landscape of shadows and distant lights. Most of the homes out here didn't have street lights, so once full dark hit, you could see the stars in a way city people never got to experience. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, and on any other night, I might have appreciated it. At 8:15, Marla's voice came over the radio. Unit 5, I've got a welfare check request. Caller says their sister went out for a drive this afternoon and hasn't come back. Last known location was Route 191 heading north. I picked up the radio. Unit 5 copies. Do we have a description of the vehicle? Silver Toyota Tacoma 2015 model. Caller says the sister mentioned she was going to drive out toward many farms, but should have been back by 6. We'll head north on 191. See if we spot it. Layton and I exchanged a look. It wasn't the call yet, not exactly, but it was close enough to make my pulse quicken. We pulled out of the station and headed north, our headlights cutting through the darkness as we left the scattered lights of Chinle behind. The road stretched out ahead of us, empty and dark. We passed the turnoff to many farms, then kept going, watching the shoulder for any sign of a broken-down truck. The mile markers ticked by in our headlights. 68, 69, 70. What happens if we find her? Layton asked quietly. We make sure she's okay and send her home, I said. And if we don't? I didn't answer that. We passed mile marker 72 and I slowed down, watching the side of the road carefully. Layton had his spotlight out, sweeping it across the desert on the passenger side. The beam caught creosote bushes and rocks, and the occasional set of animal eyes reflecting back at us, but nothing else. Then we passed mile marker 74, and the space between was just empty road. There, Layton said, pointing. I saw it too. Tire tracks cutting off the west side of the highway, recent enough that they hadn't been filled in by wind yet. I slowed to a crawl and turned on our flashing lights, pulling onto the shoulder where the tracks began. The tracks led off into the desert, winding between clumps of brush toward something I could barely make out in the darkness. A structure of some kind, maybe 100 yards off the road. The same one I'd seen on the satellite image. You want to follow them? Layton asked. Before I could answer, the radio crackled. Marla's voice came through, but it was broken up by static. Words cutting in and out. Unit 5, call, coming in. Marker 70. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch, repeat, you're breaking up. More static. Then a few words that came through clear enough to make my blood run cold. She says she can't find the road. Says something's watching her. Dispatch, what's the location? The static cleared for just a moment, and Marla's voice came through perfectly clear. Mile marker 73. I looked at Leighton. His face had gone pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. "That's impossible," he said. "We're sitting right there. There's no mile marker 73. But the tire tracks leading off into the desert said otherwise. And somewhere out there in the dark, someone was lost and scared and calling for help from a place that shouldn't exist. I put the truck in park and reached for my flashlight. "Come on," I said. "We're going to find her." The desert at night has a way of swallowing sound. Our boots crunched on gravel and dried earth as we followed the tire tracks away from the highway. But beyond that, there was nothing. No wind, no animal sounds, just our breathing and the rhythmic sweep of our flashlights across the ground ahead of us. The tracks were fresh, maybe an hour old at most. They wove between the brush in a way that didn't make sense for someone just pulling off the road. They curved and doubled back, crossed over themselves in places like whoever was driving had been lost even this close to the highway. "Calvin," Leighton said quietly, "how far out are we?" I turned and looked back. The highway was still visible, our patrol trucks' flashing lights cutting through the darkness, maybe 70, 80 yards behind us. But somehow it felt farther. Like the distance had stretched when I wasn't paying attention. "Not far," I said. "Keep your eyes on the tracks." We kept walking. The structure I'd seen from the road was getting closer, resolving itself into an old hogan that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The roof had partially collapsed, and the doorway was just a dark opening facing east like it was supposed to. But there was something wrong about it, something that made me want to stop walking and turn around. Leighton felt it too. He'd slowed down, his flashlight beam moving more erratically, sweeping back and forth like he was looking for something he couldn't name. "You see the truck yet?" he asked. No. The tracks led right up to the hogan and disappeared. Just stopped, like the vehicle had driven straight into the structure and vanished. I moved my flashlight across the area around the building, looking for where the tracks continued, but they didn't. They ended at the door. "That's not possible," Leighton said. I walked up to the hogan slowly, my hand resting on the grip of my sidearm, even though I didn't know what good it would do. The doorway was low, meant for a time when people were shorter, and I had to duck slightly to shine my light inside. The interior was empty. Dirt floor, collapsed roof beams, a few pieces of old pottery scattered in the corners. No truck, no tire tracks, no sign anyone had been inside in years. "Calvin," Leighton's voice had an edge to it. "Look at this." He was kneeling near the doorway, his flashlight pointing at the ground. I walked over and looked where he was pointing. There in the dirt, clear as anything, was a single footprint, barefoot, adult-sized, toes pointed toward the hogan. And next to it, another, and another. A trail of footprints leading from where we stood straight into the building. But there were no prints coming out. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Stay here," I said. "I'm going to check inside again." "Like hell you are," Leighton said. Standing up, "We go together." We moved into the hogan side by side, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The space was small, maybe 15 feet across, and I could see every inch of it. Empty. Nothing but dirt and broken pottery and the smell of dust and dry rot. "Where did they go?" Leighton whispered. Before I could answer, my radio crackled. The sound made us both jump, our lights swinging toward each other for a second before we caught ourselves. I pulled the radio off my belt and held it up. "Unit 5? Marla's voice came through, clearer now. "Are you still at that location?" "Affirmative. We're at a structure about 100 yards west of the highway. We found tire tracks but no vehicle." "Over?" The caller just hung up. Said she saw headlights and was going to try to reach them. I looked at Leighton. Did you hear an engine? He shook his head. No, nothing. Dispatch, we didn't see anyone approach. Are you sure the caller was at this location? There was a pause, longer than it should have been. When Marla came back, her voice was quieter. Calvin, the call came from mile marker 73. The caller gave that location specifically. There is no mile marker 73. I know, but that's what she said. That's what they always say. I stood there in the empty Hogan, my flashlight beam starting to shake slightly as my hand trembled. What do you mean, always? I pulled the recordings from the other years. Every single caller, they all gave the same location. Mile marker 73, Route 191, and every time the units we sent found nothing. She paused. Calvin, I think you need to get back to your truck. Copy that. I clipped the radio back to my belt and looked at Leighton. Let's go. We backed out of the Hogan, neither of us willing to turn around until we were clear of the doorway. The moment we stepped outside, I felt it. A change in the air, a pressure that hadn't been there before, like the desert was holding its breath. Do you feel that? Leighton asked. Yeah, We started back toward the highway, following our own footprints in the dirt, but something was wrong. The patrol truck's lights should have been visible from here, but when I looked toward where we'd parked, there was nothing. Just darkness. Where's the truck? Leighton's voice had risen slightly. Calvin, where's our truck? I swept my flashlight across the desert, looking for the road, for the lights, for anything familiar. The beam caught something about 50 yards to our left. A reflective marker, glinting in the light. A mile marker. We walked toward it, faster now. Our boots slipping on loose gravel. As we got closer, I could make out the number painted on the metal surface. 73. No, I said. That's not right. That wasn't there before. But it was there now, standing on the side of a road that looked exactly like Route 191 but somehow wasn't. The pavement was darker, the paint lines faded almost to nothing, and when I looked north and south, I couldn't see any other markers, any other lights, anything that would tell me which way led back to Chinle. Leighton was turning in circles, his flashlight beam cutting wild arcs through the night. This doesn't make sense. We walked straight back. We should be at the truck. I pulled out my radio again. Dispatch, Unit 5, we have a situation. Static. Pure static. With something underneath it that might have been voices but was too distorted to make out. Dispatch, come in. More static. Then, cutting through it, a single word in a voice that might have been Marla's but sounded wrong, stretched out and hollow. Run. The radio went dead. Not just quiet, but completely dead. The battery indicator light going dark like someone had pulled the power. I looked at Leighton, and in the glow of his flashlight I saw my own fear reflected in his face. What do we do? He asked. Before I could answer, we both heard it. An engine, coming from somewhere to the north, getting closer. Headlights appeared in the distance, wavering and uncertain, like whoever was driving couldn't quite stay on the road. Finally, Leighton said, stepping toward the approaching vehicle. Someone who can... I grabbed his arm. Wait. The vehicle was getting closer, and as it did, I could see it more clearly. A silver Toyota Tacoma, just like the one we'd been looking for. It was moving slowly, weaving back and forth across the road like the driver was drunk or disoriented. The headlights were too bright, almost painfully so, and they gave everything they touched a flat, washed-out quality. The truck passed mile marker 73 and kept going, the driver not seeming to see us, even though we were standing right there on the shoulder. I got a glimpse through the windshield as it went by. A woman, young, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, her face locked in an expression of pure terror. That's her, Leighton said. "That's gotta be her. We need to stop her." He started to move toward the road, but I pulled him back harder this time. "Look." The truck's taillights were fading into the distance to the south, toward where Chinle should have been. But as we watched, they didn't get smaller the way they should have. They got dimmer, like they were fading from existence rather than just moving away. And then maybe a quarter-mile down the road they blinked out completely. The silence that followed was absolute. No engine sounds, no tire noise, nothing. Just gone. "Where did she go?" Leighton's voice was barely a whisper. I didn't have an answer. Instead, I turned and looked north, the direction the truck had come from. The road stretched out into darkness, and somewhere in that darkness, I thought I saw movement. Something tall and thin, walking along the shoulder with a gait that wasn't quite right. "We need to find our truck," I said. "Now." We started walking south, staying on the shoulder of this wrong version of Route 191, our flashlights pointed ahead and to the sides, watching for anything that might help us orient ourselves. The mile marker stayed visible behind us for longer than it should have, still reflecting our lights even when we were too far away for that to make sense. I kept checking my watch. 8:45, 8:46, 8:47. Time was moving normally, which was almost worse than if it had stopped. It meant this was real, whatever this was. We were really walking down a road that shouldn't exist, looking for a truck that had disappeared, following a call from a marker that wasn't there. "Calvin," Leighton said, "I see something." Ahead, just barely visible in the darkness, was a shape on the side of the road. As we got closer, I could make it out more clearly. A vehicle, dark-colored, parked on the shoulder with its lights off. Our patrol truck. We both started running, relief flooding through me so strongly it almost made me dizzy. But as we got closer, that relief started to curdle into something else. The truck was there, but it was wrong. The flashing lights weren't on anymore, and the driver's side door was standing open. I could see the interior light wasn't working, leaving the cab in darkness. I slowed to a walk, then stopped about 10 feet away. Leighton stopped next to me. "Why is the door open?" he asked. "I don't know." We approached carefully, and I shined my flashlight into the cab. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the off position. The radio was dead, the computer screen dark. Everything looked normal except for that open door, swaying slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. "Maybe it didn't latch properly," Leighton said, but his voice made it clear he didn't believe it. I reached in and tried the radio, turning the key to accessory. Nothing. I tried the computer, still nothing. The truck was completely dead, every electrical system down. "Check the back," I said. Leighton moved to the rear of the truck while I stayed at the driver's door, my hand resting on my weapon again. I heard him open the back door, heard him moving equipment around. Then I heard him go very still. "Calvin, you need to see this." I walked around to the back of the truck. Leighton was holding up an evidence bag, the kind we used for collecting items at scenes. Inside was a driver's license, and even in the dim light of our flashlights I could read the name, Ruth Peshlikai. "That's the caller," Leighton said. "That's the woman who reported her sister missing. How did that get in our truck?" "I don't know, but look at the date." He turned the bag so I could see the license more clearly. The issue date was from 6 years ago. The expiration date was 3 years in the future. But the photo showed a woman who looked too old for the dates to make sense, like the picture had been taken decades ago instead of years. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Put it back." "What?" "Put it back exactly where you found it. Don't touch anything else." Leighton carefully placed the evidence bag back in the kit, his hands shaking slightly. As he did, I heard something that made me freeze. footsteps, slow and measured, coming from somewhere behind us. We both turned, flashlights up, hands moving to our weapons. The road was empty, but the sound continued, gravel crunching under weight, getting closer. "Show yourself," I called out. "Navajo Tribal Police." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, off the side of the road, a voice. Female, distant, calling out words I couldn't quite make out. "Did you hear that?" Leighton whispered. "Yeah." The voice came again, clearer this time. "Help me. Please, I can't find the road." It was the same voice from the radio. The caller, the woman, who should have been in that silver Tacoma, driving south into nothing. "Where are you?" I called back. "Keep talking so we can find you." "I'm here, right here. Why can't you see me?" The voice was coming from the direction of the Hogan, back across the desert we'd just walked through. But when I pointed my flashlight that way, there was nothing. Just empty scrubland, and in the distance, the dark shape of that collapsed building. "We're coming to you," I said. "Stay where you are." Leighton grabbed my arm. "Calvin, we can't go back out there. We need to stay with the truck. There's someone who needs help." "Is there? Or is there just a voice?" I looked at him, and in his eyes I saw the same question that was forming in my mind. What if the voice wasn't real? What if it was just another part of this place, this wrong stretch of road that existed only on November 8th, only at night, only for people who went looking for mile marker 73? But then I thought about those reports, all those calls over the years, all those people who disappeared trying to find their way back. What if they were still out there? What if they'd been out there all along, calling for help that never came? "We have to try," I said. "Then we stay together. And if things get worse, we run back to the truck." I nodded. We set off across the desert again, following the direction of the voice. It called out every few seconds, always from the same distance, never getting closer no matter how far we walked. "I'm lost. Please help me. I can't find my way." The Hogan loomed ahead, darker than the surrounding night. As we approached, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The footprints leading into the building weren't just pointing inward. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all converging on that doorway from every direction. Different sizes, different depths in the soil, but all bare feet, all pointing the same way. "Jesus," Leighton breathed. "How many people?" "I don't know." The voice called again, and this time it was coming from inside the Hogan. "Please, I'm right here. Why won't you help me?" I stepped up to the doorway, my flashlight pointing inside. The beam caught something I hadn't seen before, something that made my breath catch in my throat. In the far corner of the Hogan, almost invisible in the shadows, was a figure. Standing perfectly still, facing the wall, their back to us. The voice called out again, but the figure's head didn't move. "Ma'am," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is the Navajo Tribal Police. We're here to help you." The figure didn't respond, didn't turn around, just stood there, motionless. Leighton whispered, "That's not her. That's not right." He was right. The figure was too tall, too thin, and the way it stood was wrong. No one stood that still, that rigid, like they'd forgotten how to be human. I took a step back from the doorway. "We're leaving, now." But as I turned, I saw something that stopped me cold. Our patrol truck, visible across the desert where we'd left it, was gone. The road was gone. The only thing I could see in any direction was darkness, and the flat expanse of scrubland, and behind us, that figure in the Hogan that still hadn't moved. "Calvin," Leighton said, his voice high and tight, Where's the road? Where's our truck? I turned in a slow circle, my flashlight cutting through the night. Nothing. We were surrounded by emptiness, and the only landmark was a building that shouldn't have anyone inside it. The voice called out again, and this time I realized it wasn't coming from the Hogan. It was coming from all around us, from the desert itself, echoing off rocks and mesas I couldn't see. I can't find my way. Please help me. I'm lost. And standing there in the darkness, with my rookie deputy beside me and no road in sight, I finally understood what those reports had really been documenting all these years. Not people getting lost and finding their way back, people getting lost and never leaving. I've been in bad situations before. Domestic calls where I knew the moment I walked through the door that someone might not walk back out. Vehicle pursuits on icy roads where one wrong move meant rolling into a canyon. But this was different. This was a kind of wrong that didn't have a procedure manual, didn't have a protocol. This was the kind of thing my grandmother would have known how to handle. But she'd been gone for 5 years and I'd never paid enough attention to her stories. Leighton was breathing too fast beside me, his flashlight beam jerking around as he tried to find something, anything, that would tell us which way to go. "We can retrace our steps," he said. We walked straight out from the truck. If we walk straight back, in which direction? I asked quietly. "Do you know which way we came from?" He stopped moving. I watched him try to orient himself, try to remember, and saw the moment he realized he couldn't. Without the road as a reference point, without our truck, we had nothing. The desert looked the same in every direction, and the Hogan behind us was the only fixed point in a landscape that felt like it was shifting when I wasn't looking. "The stars," Leighton said suddenly. "We can navigate by the stars. North Star is that way, so Chinle should be, look up." He tilted his head back and I heard him make a sound low in his throat. The sky was wrong. The stars were there, thousands of them, but they weren't in the right positions. Constellations I'd known since childhood were twisted, distorted, like we were looking at them through warped glass. And the Milky Way, which should have been a clear band across the sky, was barely visible, faded to almost nothing. "That's not possible," Leighton said. "None of this is possible, but it's happening anyway." I forced myself to think. There had to be a way out. Those other callers, the ones from previous years, what had happened to them? The report said the units found nothing, but did that mean the people made it out? Or did it mean something else? I pulled out my cell phone, knowing it probably wouldn't work, but trying anyway. No signal, which wasn't surprising out here even on a normal day. But when I pulled up my GPS, it couldn't locate any satellites. The screen just showed a blank map with a blinking cursor in the center, and the words, "Location unavailable." "Try your phone," I said to Leighton. He did, with the same result. We were completely cut off, no communication, no navigation, nothing but our flashlights and weapons and the growing certainty that we'd walked into something we didn't understand. The voice called out again, closer this time. "I see your lights. I'm coming to you. Please wait for me." I turned toward the sound and saw movement in the darkness. A figure, walking toward us with an uneven gait. As it got closer, I could make out more details. A woman, or something shaped like a woman, wearing clothes that looked decades out of date. She moved wrong, like someone who'd forgotten how joints were supposed to bend. "Ma'am, stop where you are," I called out, my hand on my weapon. The figure kept coming. In my flashlight beam, I could see her face now. Young, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair and eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that had nothing to do with happiness. "I've been waiting so long," she said, her voice the same one that had been calling for help. "Every year, I wait, and every year, someone comes. But you're the first ones who stayed. "Who are you?" I asked. "I'm lost. I'm always lost. I can't find my way back." She took another step closer, and I could see now that her feet were bare, covered in dust and scratches. "But you can help me. You have a truck, you have a radio, you can take me home." Leighton's flashlight was shaking badly now. "Calvin, that's not a person, that's not—" "I know." The woman thing tilted her head at an angle that was too far, like a bird examining something interesting. "You're afraid. Why? I just need help. I just want to go home." "Where is home?" I asked, playing for time, trying to think of what to do. "I don't remember. It's been so long, but I'll know it when I see it. I'll know it if you drive me there." She smiled wider, and I saw that her teeth were wrong. Too many of them, packed too tightly in her mouth. "You'll drive me, won't you? You're police. You help people." I took a step back, and Leighton moved with me. "We can't help you. I'm sorry." Her smile vanished. "You have to help me. That's the rule. Someone calls, you come. Someone's lost, you find them. That's what you do." "Not here," I said. "Not like this." She screamed. It wasn't a human sound, wasn't anything that should have come from a human throat. It was rage and despair and hunger all mixed together. And it went on too long. Her mouth opened wider than it should have been able to go. "Run," I said to Leighton. We ran. Not in any particular direction, just away from her, away from that sound. Our flashlights bobbed and weaved, catching glimpses of rocks and brush and empty desert. Behind us, I could hear her following, her footsteps too fast, too light, like she was barely touching the ground. I didn't know where we were going. Without the road, without any landmarks, we were just running blind. But staying still meant dealing with whatever that thing was, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from it. Leighton stumbled, caught himself, kept running. I grabbed his arm and pulled him along, my lungs burning, my legs starting to cramp. We couldn't keep this up forever. We had to find something. Some kind of shelter, some way to— The Hogan appeared in front of us so suddenly we almost ran into it. Different than before. Or maybe the same one from a different angle. I couldn't tell. But the doorway was there, and I made a split-second decision that I'd probably regret. "Inside!" I gasped. We ducked through the low doorway and pressed ourselves against the wall on either side, flashlights off, trying to control our breathing. Outside, I could hear her approaching. Those two light footsteps, getting closer. She stopped at the doorway. I could see her silhouette against the slightly lighter darkness outside, standing perfectly still. "I know you're in there," she said in a conversational tone, all the rage gone from her voice. "That's okay. I'll wait. I'm very good at waiting. I've been waiting for years and years and years." She sat down in the doorway, blocking the exit, her back to us. "Would you like to know what happened to the others? The ones who came before you, some of them ran. Some of them tried to fight. Some of them just gave up and sat down and waited to see what would happen." She laughed, a sound like wind through broken glass. "They're all still here, out there, walking around, calling for help, waiting for someone to find them. Just like me." Leighton was shaking beside me, and I put a hand on his shoulder, trying to steady him. In the darkness of the Hogan, I could barely see him, but I could feel his fear radiating off him in waves. "You know what the funny thing is?" the woman thing continued. "They were trying to help people when they got lost, just like you. That's how this place works. You hear someone calling, you come to help, and then you can't leave. You become part of it, part of the waiting." I closed my eyes, thinking hard. There had to be a pattern here, something I was missing. Every year, November 8th, same date, same calls, but the units that responded never found anything, which meant they got out somehow, or they never made it this far. Ruth, Peshlakai, I said quietly. The figure in the doorway went still. What did you say? Ruth Peshlakai. That's who called it in, who reported her sister missing. But that's not right, is it? Because Ruth's sister wasn't the one who went missing. Clever, the woman thing said. But too late to help you. Ruth was driving, I continued, more to keep her talking than anything else. She was the one who disappeared. Her sister reported her missing and we came looking. We found her license in our truck. Or we will find it. Time's funny here, isn't it? Time doesn't mean anything here. This is the place where lost things go. Lost people, lost moments, lost chances. They all end up here eventually. Leighton leaned close and whispered so quietly I almost couldn't hear him. The figure in the corner. Earlier, it's still here. I turned my head slowly, not wanting to draw attention to the movement. He was right. In the far corner of the hogan, barely visible even now that my eyes had adjusted, was the figure we'd seen before. Still standing, still facing the wall, still not moving. But it wasn't alone anymore. There were others now. Or maybe they'd been there all along and I just hadn't seen them. Shapes in the shadows, standing against the walls, all facing inward. Silent. Waiting. We're not alone in here, I whispered back. The woman in the doorway laughed again. Of course you're not. You're never alone here. That's the whole point. Everyone who gets lost ends up in the same place. Together but separate. Calling out but never connecting. It's beautiful, in a way. I counted the figures. 6, maybe 7. Hard to tell where one ended and another began. And they weren't moving, but I had the sense they were aware of us. Watching us. Waiting for something. My radio crackled. Dead for the last hour, and suddenly it was making noise again. Not voices, just static, but underneath it, something rhythmic, like a heartbeat, or footsteps, or the ticking of a clock. Your dispatcher is still trying to reach you, the woman said. She's been calling and calling, but you can't hear her. Not really. You're too far away now. I pulled the radio off my belt and held it up. The static continued, and I tried to find a pattern in it, some kind of message. But it was just noise. Leighton's hand gripped my arm suddenly. Calvin, look at your watch. I tilted my wrist to catch what little light was coming through the doorway. The watch face showed 8:47. The same time it had been when we'd found the truck. The second hand was moving, but it wasn't advancing, just twitching back and forth over the same second, over and over. Time stopped, Leighton said. Or we have, I replied. The woman stood up from the doorway, her movement smooth and liquid. She turned to face us, and in the darkness, I could see her eyes glowing with a faint phosphorescence. You understand now, she said. There's no way out. There never was. The moment you crossed over, the moment you started looking for mile marker 73, you were already lost. The only question is how long you'll fight it before you accept it. I don't accept it, I said, standing up. I've been on this reservation my whole life. I know these roads, I know this land, and I know there's always a way back if you know where to look. Is that what you think? That you know this place? She stepped into the hogan, and the figures along the walls shifted slightly, like they were leaning toward her. This isn't your reservation. This is the shadow of it. The negative space, the place where all the lost roads lead. I felt Leighton stand up beside me, his hand on his weapon. What do you want from us? Want? I don't want anything. I'm just what happens when you look for something that doesn't exist. When you try to find a mile marker that was removed, a piece of road that was erased. She moved closer, and I could see now that her feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering, just slightly, like gravity had a looser hold on her than it should. This place exists because people believe it does, because every year someone hears about the calls, the missing people, the mystery, and they go looking, and they find it, and they stay. The others got out, I said. The ones who came before us. The reports say nothing was found, she interrupted. And that's true. The units came, they searched, they found no one. Because by the time they arrived, the people they were looking for had already crossed over, already become part of this place. Then how do the calls get made? If everyone who crosses over stays here, who's calling for help? She smiled. We are, all of us, everyone who's ever gotten lost here. We call, and people come to help, and the cycle continues. That's all we can do. Call out. Hope someone hears. Hope someone comes. I thought about the evidence bag in our truck. Ruth Peshlakai's license. Ruth, who had disappeared 6 years ago. Ruth, who had been the first call from mile marker 73. You're Ruth, I said. The smile faded. I was Ruth, a long time ago, before I understood what this place was. And you want to keep us here, add us to your collection. I don't want anything, but the place does. It's hungry, it's always hungry. And once you're here, once you see it for what it is, you can't leave. You can only wait for the next person to come looking. The figures along the walls were moving now, turning to face us with slow, grinding movements. I could see them better now, see the tribal police uniforms some of them wore, see the expressions on their faces empty, hollow, like they'd forgotten what emotion was. How many, Leighton asked quietly, how many officers have gotten lost here? Enough, Ruth said. Enough that you should know better. Enough that the warnings should have reached you. But they hadn't. Or if they had, we'd ignored them. Because we were police, and when someone called for help, we responded. That's what we did. That's who we were. Except now we were standing in a place that shouldn't exist, surrounded by the ghosts of everyone who'd made the same choice we had. And time had stopped, and the road was gone, and there was nowhere left to run. I looked at Leighton, and in the dim light I saw my own fear reflected in his face. But I also saw something else, determination. The same stubborn refusal to give up that had gotten us through the academy, through bad calls and worse outcomes, through nights when going home felt like more than we could manage. We're not staying, I said, more to him than to Ruth. I don't care what this place wants. I don't care how many others are trapped here. We're finding a way out. Ruth's expression didn't change. There is no way out. I've told you that. Then we'll make one. I pulled my weapon, knowing it probably wouldn't help, but needing to feel like I had some kind of control. Leighton did the same, and we stood back to back in the center of the Hogan, surrounded by figures that used to be people. You can't shoot your way out of this, Ruth said. This isn't that kind of problem. Then what kind of problem is it? She tilted her head again, considering. The kind you can only solve by letting go, by accepting, by understanding that some things can't be fixed, can't be escaped, can't be undone. You're lost. You've always been lost. You just didn't know it until now. The radio crackled again, and this time, through the static, I heard a voice. Marla's voice, distant and distorted, but unmistakable. Calvin, if you can get to... The message broke up, dissolved into noise, but it was there. Some connection to the world we'd come from, however thin. I grabbed the radio and keyed the mic. Dispatch, this is Unit 5. We need help. We're at... Where were we? How could I describe a location that didn't exist? We're at mile marker 73. We're trapped. We need... The radio died again, completely and finally. The static cut off mid-burst and the red indicator light faded to black. Ruth was watching me with something that might have been pity. Now do you understand? You're calling from here now. You're part of the cycle. Next year, on November 8th, someone will hear your voice asking for help, and they'll come looking, and they'll find this place, just like you did. No, Leighton said. His voice was stronger than I'd heard it all night. That's not how this ends. He turned to face the figure in the corner, the one that had been standing there since we first entered the Hogan. "Who are you?" he called out. "What's your name?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move. "Everyone here has a name," Leighton continued. "Everyone here was a person before they got lost. So what's yours? Who were you?" Ruth moved to intercept him, but I stepped between them. "Let him talk." "It won't do any good. They don't remember. They've been here too long." But Leighton kept going, moving from figure to figure. "Who are you? Do you remember your name? Do you remember why you came here?" One of the figures, a man in a tribal police uniform that looked like it was from the 70s, turned his head slightly. His mouth moved, forming words that had no sound. "He's trying to tell you something," I said to Ruth. "What is he saying?" "Nothing. Echoes. That's all they are now." But the man kept moving his mouth and Leighton moved closer, watching his lips. "He's saying, I remember. He remembers something." The other figures were shifting now, becoming more animated, not threatening, just aware, like they were waking up from a long sleep. Ruth's expression changed for the first time, showing something that might have been fear. "Stop. You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly what I'm doing," Leighton said. I'm reminding them they were people. They had lives. They had names." He turned to another figure, a woman in civilian clothes. "What's your name? Where did you come from?" The woman's mouth moved. No sound, but I could read the shape of the words. "Sarah, Window Rock." "When?" Leighton pressed. "When did you come here?" Her hand rose slowly, trembling, and held up fingers. 3 of them. 3 years ago?" Leighton asked. She nodded, once, then again, and with each nod she seemed more solid, more real. Ruth was backing toward the doorway now. "You need to stop. The place doesn't like this. It doesn't like being challenged." "I don't care what it likes," I said, understanding what Leighton was doing. "These are people. They deserve to be remembered." I turned to the man in the old uniform. "What's your name, officer?" His mouth moved again, and this time a sound came out. Faint, like wind through a canyon, but there. "Thomas Yazzie." "When did you get lost, Thomas?" 1974. 51 years. He'd been here for 51 years, standing in this Hogan, waiting, but he was talking now. He was remembering. The Hogan started to shake. Not violently, just a low tremor that made dust drift down from the collapsed roof beams. Ruth let out a sound that was almost a wail. "You're going to destroy everything," she said. "You're going to unmake this place." "Good," Leighton said. "Let it fall apart. Let it end." He was moving from figure to figure now, asking names, asking when they came here. And each one who answered seemed to come more alive, seemed to remember more. The shaking grew stronger, and cracks appeared in the Hogan's walls. I joined him, taking the figures on the opposite side of the structure. "Who are you? When did you get lost?" Over and over, the same questions, pulling them back from wherever they'd gone. Ruth was screaming now, but she wasn't trying to stop us anymore. She was just screaming, a sound of loss and rage that filled the hogan and spilled out into the desert beyond. And then, with a final shudder, one of the walls collapsed, not inward, but outward, falling away to reveal something beyond. Not desert, not darkness. A road, Route 191, clear as day, with our patrol truck sitting on the shoulder right where we'd left it. The flashing lights were on again, cutting through the night. And beyond it, I could see the glow of Chinle in the distance. "Go," Thomas Yazzie said, his voice still faint but clear, "before it closes again." I looked at the figures around us. They were more solid now, more real, but they weren't moving toward the opening. They were just standing there, watching us. "Come with us," I said. Thomas shook his head. "We've been here too long. We're part of this place now. But you? You can still leave. You still remember who you are. I'm not leaving you here. You have to. This place exists because we're here. If we stay, it stays contained. If we leave..." He gestured to Ruth, who was on her knees now, still screaming. "It spreads. It finds new places to exist, new roads to haunt." "He's right," Sarah said, her voice stronger than Thomas's. "Go. Tell people what happened here. Make sure no one else comes looking for mile marker 73. The opening was starting to shimmer, becoming less solid. I could see it starting to close. Leighton grabbed my arm. "Calvin, we need to go. Now." I looked at Thomas, at Sarah, at all the others who'd been trapped here for years. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Thomas said. "You gave us our names back. That's more than anyone else has done." We ran, through the opening, across the desert that suddenly felt real and solid under our feet. Behind us, I heard the hogan collapsing completely, heard Ruth's scream cut off abruptly. But I didn't look back. I just ran, with Leighton beside me, until we reached the truck and threw ourselves inside. I started the engine, not caring that every procedure said we should check the vehicle first, should make sure everything was secure. I just needed to get away from this place, needed to put distance between us and whatever had just happened. The truck roared to life, and I threw it in gear and hit the gas. We fishtailed on the gravel shoulder, then found traction and shot forward, south toward Chinle. In the rearview mirror, I saw the desert behind us. Empty. No hogan, no figures, no sign that anything had been there at all. Except for one thing. Mile marker 73 still standing on the side of the road. Still there. Even though it shouldn't be. Still waiting for the next person who came looking. We didn't speak for the first 10 miles, just drove, watching the road ahead, listening to the sound of the tires on pavement and the engine running normal and steady. Every few seconds I'd check the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. But there was only darkness and the glow of our taillights on the asphalt. When the lights of Chinle finally appeared ahead, Leighton let out a breath he'd been holding for too long. "Did that really happen?" "Yeah," I said. "It happened. What do we tell people?" I thought about that. The truth would sound insane. 2 officers disappeared for hours, came back with a story about a place that doesn't exist, time that stopped, and ghosts of missing people going back 50 years. We'd be benched for psychological evaluation at minimum, probably drummed out of the department. "We tell them we got lost," I said finally. "Followed some tracks into the desert, lost our bearings, took a while to find our way back. Radio malfunction, GPS failure, it happens. They'll want to know what we found. Nothing. We found nothing. No truck, no missing person, just empty desert." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Ruth Peshlakai. We need to check on her, make sure she's real." "I know." We pulled into the station just after midnight. The time on my watch showed 12:03, and when I compared it to the clock on the dashboard, they matched. Time was moving normally again, had been since we got back on the real road. Whatever had happened out there, we'd left it behind. Marla was still at dispatch, and when she saw us walk in, her face showed relief mixed with confusion. "Where the hell have you been? I've been trying to raise you for 3 hours." "Radio malfunction," I said. "We were out of range, checking on some tracks near, I caught myself before saying mile marker 73, near the turnoff to many farms. Dead end, nothing there." She looked at us skeptically, and I knew she could tell we were holding something back. But she didn't push it, just nodded and said, "The sister called again, said she still hasn't heard from her. We've got units checking between here and Farmington." "What's the sister's name?" Leighton asked. Marla checked her notes. "Ruth Peshlakai, lives in Ganado. She's pretty worried." So Ruth was real, was alive, was still looking for her sister, which meant what we'd seen out there, the thing that called itself Ruth, had been something else, or some version of her that existed in that place, trapped there along with all the others. "Did she say what kind of truck her sister was driving?" I asked. "Silver Tacoma, 2015. The same truck we'd seen. The same truck that had driven past us on that wrong version of the road and disappeared into nothing. "We'll follow up in the morning," I said. "Right now, we need to file our reports and get some rest." The reports took an hour to write, and they were the most dishonest documents I'd ever filed. But I made them detailed enough to be believable, vague enough to explain why we'd been out of contact for so long. Just another night on patrol where things went slightly wrong, but not wrong enough to matter. When we were done, Leighton and I sat in the parking lot in our personal vehicles, engines running, neither of us quite ready to go home yet. He got out and walked over to my truck, and I rolled down the window. "What do we do if it happens again next year?" he asked. "What if someone else gets a call from mile marker 73? "We make sure we're the ones who respond," I said. "And we don't go looking. We stay on the road. We don't follow the tracks. And if someone's really in trouble, then we help them. But we stay on the real road. We don't cross over." He nodded slowly. "Do you think they're still there? Thomas and Sarah and the others?" "Yeah, I think they're still there. Probably will be until that place finally falls apart completely. We should tell someone, put up warnings, make sure people know not to go looking for that marker. Who would believe us? And even if they did, you know what would happen. People would go looking just to prove it's not real. We'd make it worse." He knew I was right, but I could see it bothered him. It bothered me, too. The idea that those people were still out there trapped in that wrong version of the desert, waiting for something that would never come. "Get some sleep," I said. "We've got another shift in 12 hours. He walked back to his car, and I watched him drive away before I put my truck in gear and headed home. The roads were empty at this hour, just me and the night and the endless stretch of highway cutting through the reservation. I drove past the turnoff to Route 191 North and didn't look at it. Didn't think about what might be out there, 30 miles up the road, waiting in the darkness. I just kept driving, kept my eyes ahead, kept moving forward. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for a long time before going inside. The house was dark and empty, and I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. But eventually, I forced myself to go in, forced myself to go through the motions of normal life. Shower, food, bed. But I didn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about Thomas Yazzie and how long he'd been standing in that hogan. 51 years. 51 years of waiting, of calling out, of hoping someone would find him. And all we'd been able to do was give him his name back before we left him there. The next morning, I called Ruth Peshlakai. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight with worry. "Miss Peshlakai, this is Officer Calvin Nesba with the tribal police. I understand your sister is missing." "Yes. She went out yesterday afternoon and never came back. She was supposed to call me when she got to Farmington, but I never heard from her. Can you describe your sister for me? She's 26, about 5'6", long dark hair. She was driving a silver Tacoma." A pause. "Officer, do you think she's okay?" I thought about the truck we'd seen, the woman behind the wheel with terror on her face, the way it had just faded into nothing. "We're doing everything we can to find her," I said. "Can you tell me, has your sister ever mentioned mile marker 73 on Route 191? "What? No, I don't think so." "Why?" "No reason. Just trying to trace her route." I paused. "Miss Peshlakai, if we don't find your sister in the next few days, I want you to know we won't stop looking. Sometimes these cases take time to resolve." "Thank you, officer." I hung up and sat at my desk, staring at the phone. We wouldn't find her sister. I knew that with a certainty that made my chest ache. She'd crossed over, just like all the others, and now she was part of that place, part of the cycle, calling out for help that would only trap more people. Leighton came in an hour later, looking like he'd slept about as well as I had. He had a folder in his hand, and when he dropped it on my desk, I saw it was full of printouts. "I spent half the night going through old reports," he said. "Not just the November 8th calls. All missing person cases from Route 191 going back 20 years. And 47 people. 47 people who went missing on or near that stretch of road. Different times of year, different circumstances, but they all have one thing in common. None of them were ever found." I looked at the reports. Hikers, drivers, tourists, locals. Men and women, old and young. The only pattern was the location and the fact that they'd vanished without a trace. "That place has been there a long time," I said quietly. "Maybe it's always been there. Maybe it'll always be there. So what do we do?" I thought about Thomas's words, about how the place stayed contained as long as they stayed, about how it would spread if they left. We'd weakened it, maybe, by helping them remember. But we hadn't destroyed it. "We do our jobs," I said. "We keep people safe. And if we get another call from mile marker 73, we respond. But we stay on the road. We don't go looking." He nodded slowly. "And next year, on November 8th, next year we'll be ready." But I wasn't sure what being ready meant. How do you prepare for a place that exists in the cracks between real and not real? How do you protect people from something that feeds on the desire to help? The answer came to me slowly over the following weeks. We couldn't stop people from going missing on that road, but we could stop them from going looking. We could make sure that when those calls came in, the response was controlled, limited, safe. I started keeping my own records, separate from the official reports. Every missing person case from Route 191, every unexplained call, every time someone reported seeing lights or hearing voices in the desert near where mile marker 73 should have been. And I made sure I was the one who responded to those calls, or, if I couldn't, that Leighton was. We developed protocols that weren't in any manual. Never follow tracks more than 50 yards from the road. Never respond alone. Never let time get away from you. If your watch stops, you turn back immediately. Never trust voices calling for help unless you can see the person calling. And on November 8th of every year since then, Leighton and I have been out on that road, watching, waiting, making sure that if someone goes looking for mile marker 73, we're there to stop them before they cross over. We've intercepted 4 people so far. Curious locals who'd heard the stories. True crime enthusiasts looking for content. One journalist who is writing a book about unexplained disappearances on tribal lands. We've turned them all away with citations for trespassing or warnings about road conditions or whatever excuse we needed to keep them from going looking. But we can't stop everyone. Last year, on November 8th, we got a call at 8:47 p.m. A man reporting his girlfriend was lost somewhere near Route 191. Said she'd gone for a drive and called him in a panic, saying she couldn't find the road even though she could see it. We were there in 15 minutes. Found her car on the shoulder, door open, engine running. Found her tracks leading off into the desert. Followed them for exactly 49 yards before I saw where they ended. At a hogan that shouldn't have been there. I stopped Leighton before he could get any closer. We stood there, our flashlights pointed at that doorway, and I could see shapes moving inside. More than before. More people who'd gotten lost, who'd crossed over, who were now part of that place. And standing in the doorway, watching us with eyes that glowed in the darkness, was Ruth Peshlakai. Or what used to be Ruth Peshlakai. She smiled when she saw us. "Back again?" she said. "You should know by now there's nothing you can do." "Where's the woman who came here tonight?" I asked. "Where they all go, where you'll go eventually. Everyone ends up here sooner or later. Everyone who drives these roads long enough." "That's not true, isn't it? You come back every year. You can't stay away. You're drawn here just like everyone else. The only difference is you're fighting it." She tilted her head. "How much longer do you think you can keep fighting?" I didn't have an answer for that. So I just turned around and walked back to the road with Leighton following. Behind us, I heard Ruth laugh. We found the woman's boyfriend at the station, waiting for news. I had to tell him we'd found her car but not her, that we'd keep looking, but he should prepare for the possibility that she might not come back. The look on his face when he realized what I was really saying, that was the hardest part. It's been 3 years since that night when Leighton and I first went looking for mile marker 73. 3 years of watching that stretch of road, of turning people away, of living with the knowledge that there are dozens of people trapped in a place between real and not real, and there's nothing we can do to help them. I think about Thomas Yazzie sometimes, about how he stood there for 51 years before we gave him his name back. I wonder if that helped, if having that piece of himself made the waiting easier. I hope it did, and I think about Ruth's question. How long can I keep fighting? How many more November 8ths can I spend out on that road, watching for people who might go looking for something they'll never find their way back from? I don't know the answer, but I know I'll be there next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. Because someone has to watch. Someone has to remember that mile marker 73 doesn't exist on any map, but it's still there. Still waiting. Still calling people in with voices asking for help. And because somewhere out there in the desert, in a place where time doesn't move right and the stars are wrong and the road goes nowhere, there are people who deserve to be remembered. People who had names, had lives, had families, who miss them. I can't bring them home, but I can make sure their names don't disappear completely. I can make sure someone remembers they were real, they were people, and they didn't deserve what happened to them. That's all I can do. That, and stay on the road. No matter what I hear calling from the darkness, no matter what lights I see in the distance, no matter how strong the pull to go looking becomes, I stay on the road, and I hope that's enough.